My first night as a watchman started the way most jobs do. Quiet, awkward, and heavier than I expected. The cemetery office smelled like dust and old paper. The walls were covered in framed maps, yellowed notices, and a clock that ticked louder than it should have. The man who trained me, Mr. Harlan, spoke slowly and didn't look me in the eyes much. He handed me a flashlight, a ring of keys, and a folded map of the grounds. "Just walk the paths," he said. "Check the gates. Make sure no one's sleeping where they shouldn't." That was it. No warnings. No stories. He clocked out at exactly 9 and left me alone with the sound of the clock and the weight of the place settling in. The cemetery was old. Not the kind with clean rows and polished stone. This one grew wild at the edges. Trees leaned inward like they were listening. The gravel paths curved instead of running straight. As if the land itself didn't want to be organized, I unfolded the map under the desk lamp. It showed sections labeled with letters. Family plots, a small chapel, a maintenance shed. Everything looked simple enough. Outside, the gate creaked when I pushed it open. The air was cold in that deep, damp way that sticks to your skin. My boots sounded too loud on the gravel, so I slowed my steps without meaning to. I told myself it was just nerves. First night jitters. I started with Section A, closest to the entrance. The headstones there were neat, some of flowers that looked fresh even in the dark. Names and dates. Lives that made sense. I checked the fence line, shined my light under benches, and kept moving. As I walked, I matched what I saw to the map in my hand. Path turned row of stones. Everything lined up, at least at first. By the time I reached Section C, the paths narrowed. The trees grew thicker, their branches crossing overhead. My flashlight beam felt smaller here, like the dark was pushing back. I stopped at a stone that caught my eye. It was plain, no name, just a date carved deep into the rock. No birth year, just a day and time. I frowned and checked the map. There was no marker for a grave in that spot. I shrugged it off. Old place. Maybe the map was outdated. I kept walking. 10 minutes later, I found another one. This one had a name, but it was scratched out. The letters were still visible if you looked close. Someone had tried to erase them, but the stone remembered. Again, nothing on the map. I slowed down, my fingers tightening around the flashlight. I flipped the map over, thinking maybe there was a second page. There wasn't. The path curved left, leading into a part of the cemetery marked as empty space on the map. Just a blank area, shaded lightly, like they hadn't bothered to detail it. But it wasn't empty. Rows of graves stretched ahead of me, uneven and crooked. Some stones leaned like tired people. Others were sunk, so low that only the top showed. Grass grew thick between them, untouched by trimming. I stood there longer than I meant to, listening. The night had changed. The air felt heavier, pressed down. Even the bugs were quiet. I told myself I must have taken a wrong turn, that I'd crossed into an older section they forgot to label. Still, my chest felt tight. I walked between the rows, reading stones as I passed. The names were unfamiliar. The dates were strange. Many of them ended in the same year. None of them showed birth dates. Just endings. My flashlight flickered once. I smacked it against my palm, annoyed more than scared. The beam steadied, but I didn't like how the dark rushed back and around it. I reached the end of the row and expected to see the fence line. Instead, there was another path. Narrower, unmarked. It wasn't on the map either. I turned back the way I came. The path behind me didn't look the same. The curve was sharper. The trees closer together. For a moment, I thought I'd turn around wrong, but the graves were the same. Same stones, same crooked angles. I laughed quietly to myself, a short sound that didn't feel real. Get a grip? I whispered. I pulled out my radio and checked it. Full signal. I didn't call anyone. I didn't want to sound stupid on my first night. I chose a direction and kept walking. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't fresh. No clear edges. Just shallow impressions in the dirt between the graves, like someone had walked there a long time ago and the ground never fully forgot. They were barefoot. They led past the stones and off the path, straight into the trees. I didn't follow them. I'm not brave. I'm not curious like that. I stayed where the gravel was, where the job told me I should be. But as I walked, I started seeing more graves that didn't belong. Some were too close together. Some overlapped. A few had stones placed at odd angles, facing away from the path like they were turned on purpose. One grave had no stone at all, just a patch of ground that looked disturbed, even though the soil was packed hard. I stopped there, staring down at it. That's when I realized the sound I'd been hearing. Breathing. Not loud, not close, just present, like the night itself was alive and drawing air through unseen lungs. I held my breath. The sound continued. I backed away slowly, my heel catching on a stone. The breath hitched like it noticed me. I didn't run. I should have, but my legs felt thick and slow, like I was wading through deep water. When I finally reached a familiar path, I didn't stop walking until I could see the glow of the entrance lights. I locked the gates early. I didn't care what the rules said. Inside the office, I sat at the desk and unfolded the map again. My hands shook, so I pressed them flat against the paper. There were no extra sections, no hidden areas, but something had changed. New pencil marks ran across the blank space. Light lines, like someone had sketched rows where nothing used to be. Little squares, little stones. I stared at them until my eyes burned. I hadn't drawn them. I knew that. At the bottom corner of the map, in handwriting that looked a lot like mine, were 3 words. Still incomplete. I didn't finish my shift that night. I told myself I was sick. I told myself a lot of things. But when I went back the next evening, the map on the wall had been updated, and the blank space was gone. The second night felt heavier before it even started. I arrived early, just before sunset, hoping to talk to Mr. Harlan. I wanted to ask him about the blank space on the map, about the extra graves, about the pencil marks that looked like my handwriting. He wasn't there. The office was unlocked. Lights on. Coffee still warmed in the pot, like someone had just stepped out. His jacket hung on the back of the chair. I called his name once. Then again. No answer. I stood there longer than I should have, listening to the clock tick. Eventually, I told myself he must have gone to the restroom or stepped outside. I didn't want to seem nervous. I didn't want to seem like the kind of guy who couldn't handle a quiet job. The map on the wall was clean. No blank space. No added sections. Just neat lines and labels like it had always been that way. I checked the folded map on the desk. Same thing. I felt a small wave of relief. Enough to make me feel stupid for the night before. I clipped the radio to my belt, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped outside as the sun dropped behind the trees. The cemetery looked calmer than it had the night before. The wind moved softly through the branches. A few bugs hummed in the air. It almost felt normal. I followed the same route. Section A, Section B. Everything lined up. The stones were where they should be. The paths curved, but not too much. Still, I kept glancing down at the map, like it might change if I didn't watch it. About an hour into my shift, I reached the edge of Section C. The trees grew thicker here again. The air cooled fast, settling into my jacket. That's when I saw the gate. It stood between 2 leaning stone pillars, half hidden by ivy and shadow. Tall iron bars, rusted hinges, a heavy chain wrapped around the middle, secured with a thick padlock. I stopped walking. The gate wasn't on the map. I moved closer, shining my light across it. The metal was old, older than the other fences around the cemetery. The chain looked newer by comparison, like someone had added it later. Beyond the gate, I could see more ground, more stones. The path continued, disappearing into darkness. I checked the map again. Nothing. I stood there, trying to think. Maybe it was a maintenance gate. Maybe it led to private land. Maybe it wasn't my business. But the rules were clear. Check all gates. Lock them if needed. Report damage. This gate was already locked. I tested it anyway. The chain didn't budge. The padlock was solid and cold under my fingers. I leaned in close, inspecting it. That's when I noticed the scratches. Small marks around the lock. Not rust. Not wear. They were thin and uneven, like fingernails dragged across metal. I pulled my hand back without thinking. My radio crackled softly at my side. Just static. I tapped it once, then twice. The sound stopped. I told myself to mark the gate in my report and move on. That's what a normal person would do. But something about it bothered me. The fact that no one mentioned it. The way it felt like it had always been there, waiting. I walked along the fence line on either side, following it through the brush. The iron bars extended farther than I expected, curving out of sight. No breaks, no openings. It wasn't separating the cemetery from the outside. It was separating part of the cemetery from the rest of itself. I swallowed and turned back toward the main path. That's when I realized something else was wrong. The path behind me was blocked by another gate. I froze. This one was smaller, but just as solid. Same iron, same chain, same padlock. It hadn't been there when I walked in. I stared at it, my heart beating hard enough to feel in my throat. I checked the ground. No signs of anyone moving. No footprints. No disturbed gravel. Just the gate. I spun slowly, shining my flashlight around. Trees. Stones. Shadows. Silence. The gate behind me rattled once. Just a small sound. Metal shifting slightly, like something had leaned against it. I didn't turn around right away. I stood there, staring at the locked gate in front of me, trying to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation. My breathing sounded too loud. I turned. Nothing was there. The gate stood still, chain hanging loose but locked tight. I backed away, my shoulder brushing a headstone. It was colder than I expected, even through my jacket. I whispered, "Okay," like that settled something. I tried the radio again. Static, then a faint click, like someone had pressed a button on the other end. "Hello," I said. No response. I moved along the fence, searching for an opening. The gates curved inward now, narrowing the space between them. The cemetery felt smaller, closer. I kept thinking about the map, about how clean it looked now, about how easy it was to believe nothing had ever been wrong. After what felt like forever, I found a third gate. This one stood open. Relief washed over me so fast it made my knees weak. I stepped through without thinking, not even checking the hinges. The moment I crossed the threshold, the gate slammed shut behind me. The sound echoed, sharp and final. I jumped, my heart pounding, and spun around. The gate was closed now, locked. Same chain, same padlock. I stood there, shaking, my flashlight beam bouncing across the bars. On the other side of the gate, carved into the stone pillar, were words I hadn't seen before. Authorized exit only. I laughed once, short and strained. "You've got to be kidding me," I whispered. I turned away from the gate and followed the path ahead, my steps quick and uneven. The graves here were different, newer. The stones were cleaner, but the names were unfamiliar. The dates were recent. Some of them hadn't happened yet. I stopped in front of one that caught my eye. The stone was blank. No name, no date, just space. I felt a pressure in my chest, like something was pushing from the inside. I had the sudden, terrible thought that the cemetery wasn't finished with me yet, that it was still organizing. I heard footsteps then, slow, careful, somewhere behind the trees. I didn't call out. I didn't move. I just listened. The steps stopped. A voice spoke softly, close enough that I knew it wasn't my imagination. "Gates closed," it said. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't care where I was going. I followed the path until it widened, until the trees thinned, until the entrance lights came into view like a promise. When I reached the office, I slammed the door and locked it, my hand shaking so hard I dropped the keys twice. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall until my breathing slowed. When I finally stood and looked at the map on the wall, my stomach dropped. A new section had been added. A thin line marked the gate, and next to it, written small and neat, were the words, "Access restricted after entry." By the third night, I was already tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. I told myself I would quit after that shift. I promised myself that. I even said it out loud while driving there, like the words would protect me. One more night. Finish clean. Hand in the keys. Walk away. The sky was still dark when I arrived. The office lights were on again, same as before. No car outside. No sign of Mr. Harlan. I didn't call his name this time. I stepped inside and locked the door behind me. The clock on the wall read 4:12 a.m. That didn't make sense. My shift didn't start until 9 at night. I checked my phone. The screen glowed bright in the dim office. 9:03 p.m. I looked back at the clock. Still 4:12. It ticked once. Loud. Slow. I swallowed and set my phone face down on the desk. The logbook sat open where it always was, pen resting across the page. I hadn't touched it yet. I knew that. I could still feel the stiffness of my fingers from gripping the steering wheel. I didn't look at the pages. Not yet. I grabbed the flashlight and radio and stepped outside. I needed fresh air. I needed movement. Standing still felt dangerous now, like the place noticed when you stopped. The cemetery greeted me with the same cold silence. No wind, no insects, just rows of stone and shadow. I followed the main path, sticking to areas I knew. I avoided the gates. I avoided the newer stones. I kept my head down and my light steady. Every few minutes, I checked the radio. It stayed quiet. The farther I walked, the more wrong everything felt. The paths didn't line up with my memory. Turns felt longer. Straight stretches curved when I wasn't looking. Once, I passed a stone I was sure I'd already seen. I stopped and stared at it, my heart pounding. Same name, same crack down the middle, same small chip at the base. I turned around slowly. The path behind me was empty. No footprints. No sign I'd been there before. I kept walking. At some point, the sky began to lighten, just a little. That soft gray blue that comes before morning. Relief crept in despite everything. Dawn meant the end. Dawn meant the place lost some of its power. That's what people say. Anyway, when the entrance lights came into view, I almost laughed. I didn't rush. I didn't want to trip or make noise. I walked like I belonged there, like nothing had happened. Inside the office, the air felt warmer, safer. The clock on the wall now read 6:48 a.m. That was closer. Still wrong, but closer. I set my gear down and finally looked at the logbook. My name was written at the top of the page. The date was correct. Below it were notes. Patrol started. 9 p.m. section to clear. Section be clear. Gate inspected. Secured. I frowned. Gate inspected? I turned the page. Section C restricted. No issues noted. Unusual sounds logged. No response required. My mouth went dry. I hadn't written any of that. I knew my handwriting. I'd spent years filling out forms, signing receipts, jotting notes. This was close. Close enough to fool someone else. But I could see the differences. The letters leaned slightly more to the right. The pressure was heavier. The way the Y crossed the line was wrong. It was my handwriting, but it wasn't mine. I flipped through more pages. The entire shift was documented. Every section, every path, times written neatly in the margins. There were notes I didn't remember making. Observed movement near older stones. No engagement necessary. Gate status unchanged. Subject non-compliant. Log for review. I read that line 3 times. Subject? My chest tightened. I felt suddenly aware of my own body. My breathing. My pulse. At the bottom of the final page was a signature. My name again. This time, the pen had pressed so hard it left an impression on the next sheet. I backed away from the desk until I hit the wall. My legs felt weak, like they might fold if I let them. No, I whispered. No, no, no. The radio on the desk crackled. I froze. A soft voice came through, low and calm. Shift complete. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The radio clicked off. I stood there for a long time, staring at the logbook. My mind tried to build explanations. Sleepwalking, stress, a prank. None of them held. I hadn't even been in the office long enough to write any of it. I grabbed the map from the wall and spread it across the desk. New markings have been added again, paths refined, gates labeled, sections expanded. The blank space from the first night was now fully detailed, rows drawn tight and orderly. At the center of it all was a small mark. Next to it were 2 words. Position confirmed. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I closed the map and pushed it away. Outside, the sky was brighter now. Birds began to call from somewhere beyond the fence. Morning was doing its best to pretend everything was normal. I packed up my things fast. Too fast. Keys rattling. Flashlight slipping from my grip. As I reached for the door, I noticed something taped to it. A small yellow note, written in that same careful handwriting. Thank you for your cooperation. I ripped it down and shoved it into my pocket without looking at it again. I left the office unlocked. I didn't care. At my car, I paused and looked back at the cemetery one last time. The gate stood open, quiet, innocent. From a distance, it looked like any other place for the dead. I drove home with the radio off, my thoughts loud and tangled. I didn't sleep that day. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was short, schedule updated. See you tonight. I blocked the number. Then another message came through. Different number. Same words. I shut my phone off and sat there in the dark. Hands shaking, heart racing. Later, when I finally worked up the nerve to look at the logbook in my memory again, one detail stood out that I hadn't noticed before. The patrol notes didn't stop at dawn. They continued. And every entry after that was written in future tense. The job paid well for a reason, but no one ever said that part out loud. I was a highway patrol contractor, not a cop. No badge, no gun, just a reflective vest, a marked truck, and a radio that barely worked once you got far enough out. My job was simple on paper. Sit near mile marker 77. Watch the road. Call in anything unusual. There were no exits out there. No rest stops. No lights. Just a straight stretch of highway cutting through empty land like someone drew a line and forgot to erase it. The first night I worked that post, I thought it was a joke. The map showed the road thinning into nothing. No side roads. No turnarounds. Just asphalt and dark. I parked where they told me to, nose-facing traffic, engine idling low. The headlights of passing cars swept over me and vanished. No one slowed down. No one waved. Most didn't even seem to notice I was there. After the first hour, I realized how quiet it was between cars. No wind, no insects, no distant hum of civilization. Just the ticking of my engine and the soft buzz of the radio. I tried the radio. Unit 7 checking in. Static answered me. Then a click. Like someone almost replied and changed their mind. I leaned back and watched the road. Every vehicle moved fast through that stretch. Faster than the speed limit. Like they didn't want to be there any longer than they had to. Like they were holding their breath. Around midnight, I noticed something odd. A car passed me going north. 10 minutes later, the same car passed again. Same color. Same dent in the rear bumper. Same flickering tail light. I sat up straighter, eyes tracking it until it disappeared into the dark. I checked my watch. Time was moving normally. I hadn't lost track of minutes. I knew that. I told myself it must be a similar car. Plenty of those on the road. Still, I wrote it down in my notebook. Habit more than concern. An hour later, it happened again. Same car, same speed, same dent. This time, when it passed, I caught a glimpse of the driver. He was staring straight ahead. Hands tight on the wheel, eyes wide, jaw locked. He looked terrified. I reached for the radio. Unit 7 to dispatch. I'm seeing repeated traffic. Possible loop. Static. Then a low hum. No voice. I stepped out of the truck, boots crunching softly on gravel. The air felt wrong out there. Thick. Pressed flat. Like the sky was too low. I shined my flashlight down the road. The beam stretched farther than it should have, cutting a clean tunnel through the dark. There was no curve, no rise. The road just went on, perfectly straight until it vanished. That's when I noticed a mile marker. I frowned. I was parked right next to it. I knew that. I walked a few steps forward. Another mile marker stood ahead. Also 77. I turned around slowly. Behind me was the same marker. Same scratches. Same faded paint. My chest tightened. I walked back to the truck and sat down hard, shutting the door and locking it. I don't know why I locked it. There was nothing out there to keep out. I checked my phone. No signal. The time read 12:41 a.m. I watched the road again. A truck came through. Big rig. Long trailer. It didn't slow down. As it passed, the driver laid on the horn. Not a warning. Not anger. It sounded desperate. The horn faded, stretched thin by distance, until it warped into something else. Almost like a voice trying to say something it couldn't finish. I covered my ears until it stopped. After that, the road went empty again. Minutes passed. Then more. I started to feel watched. Not from the sides. Not from behind. From the road itself. Like it knew I was there. Like it was waiting. At 1:13 a.m., headlights appeared in the distance. Far off. Too far to tell what kind of vehicle it was. They didn't get closer. They stayed exactly where they were, floating in the dark like two steady stars. I watched them for a long time. My eyes burned. My neck ached. They never moved. I tried the radio again. Dispatch! Do you see traffic at mile 77? This time, a voice answered. Copy, it said. Calm. Flat. Nothing stops out there. I froze. That's not what I asked, I said. Static. Then the click. The headlights blinked off. The road went dark. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have. The next thing I knew, my head jerked up and my neck screamed in pain. The truck engine was still running. The radio was hissing softly. My watch read 3:02 a.m. The mile marker outside, my window read 77. Just one this time. I let out a shaky breath and rubbed my face. Maybe I'd imagined the rest. Fatigue can do that. Long shifts mess with your head. Then a car passed. Slowly. Too slowly. It rolled by my truck at a crawl. I could see the driver clearly. It was the same man. Same face. Same fear. But now his mouth was open, stretched wide in a silent scream. As he passed, his eyes shifted. Just for a second. He looked straight at me. The car continued down the road, picked up speed, and vanished. I grabbed the keys, turned the wheel, and pulled onto the road behind him. I didn't think. I just acted. I needed to know. I needed it to make sense. I drove for 5 minutes. 10. The road never changed. No exits. No signs. No curves. Then I saw my own headlights in the distance, coming toward me. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the wheel. I slowed, heart hammering. The oncoming truck was mine. Same scratches on the bumper. Same equipment in the bed. As it passed, I saw myself in the driver's seat, eyes wide, jaw locked, staring straight ahead. I slammed the brakes and spun the wheel, pulling over hard. Gravel sprayed. The engine stalled. The road was empty again. I sat there, shaking, until dawn crept in slow and gray. When the sun finally rose, the road looked normal, just asphalt and dirt in distance. A tow truck found me an hour later. The driver didn't ask questions, just hooked me up and hauled me out. When we reached the nearest exit, I looked back. The sign read mile marker 78. I never took another contract after that. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear a horn in the distance, long stretched, unfinished, and I remember what the voice on the radio said. Nothing stops out there, not even you. The second night out, there felt different the moment I parked the truck. Same stretch of road, same dark sky, same mile marker that still made my stomach tighten when I looked at it, but the silence had weight now, like it remembered me. I sat with the engine off this time. I didn't want the noise. I wanted to hear if anything else was out there with me. The radio sat clipped to the dash, its small green light steady. I hadn't touched it yet. I kept telling myself that if it stayed quiet, everything might stay normal. I checked my notebook. Fresh page. Empty lines. I wrote the date and time with a pen that shook just a little. 11:06 p.m. I stared down the road. No headlights. No movement. Just that long, straight stretch of asphalt fading into black. I told myself the first night had been stress, fatigue, the brain trying to make patterns where none existed. I'd worked worse posts before. Places so quiet they made your ears ring. This was just another one. The radio crackled. I jumped. My hand flew to it before I could stop myself. Unit 7. A voice said, "Stand by." I froze. The voice was calm, professional, male, older, maybe. It sounded exactly like the dispatchers I remember from years ago. Years ago. Because that call sign Unit 7 hadn't been used in a long time. I knew that because I used to be Unit 7, back when I worked patrol full-time, before budget cuts, before they switched to the new system. My throat felt dry. "Dispatch," I said slowly. "This is a contractor unit. Identify." Static filled the space between words. Then the voice came back. 10-4, it said. "Signal check complete." My heart started to race. They hadn't used 10 codes in years either. Everything was plain language now. Clear, clean, no room for confusion. I squeezed the radio tighter. "Dispatch, what channel are you on?" A pause. Long enough for me to hear my own breathing. "Same as always," the voice replied. "Don't you remember?" I didn't answer. The road stayed empty. The dark pressing from all sides, thick and unmoving. I tried to reason through it. Old equipment. Someone messing around. A recorded loop accidentally triggered. But none of that explained how the voice knew my old call sign. The radio clicked again. "Unit 7, report status." I swallowed. I'm on duty. Mile marker 77. No incidents." The words felt wrong as soon as I said them. Another pause. Then, softly, "Copy. Maintain position." I stared at the mile marker outside my window. The number 77 reflected faintly in my headlights. "Dispatch," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Confirm date." Static hissed. Then the voice answered. "July 17th, it said, 1998. My hands went numb. That was my first year on the force. "That's not possible," I whispered. The radio crackled louder now, the sound sharp and uneven. When the voice returned, it wasn't as smooth. "Possible," it said. "Recorded." A car appeared in the distance. Just one set of headlights. Far off, moving slow. I felt a small rush of relief. Proof that the road was real. That I wasn't alone in it. "Dispatch," I said. "I got visual on traffic." "Negative," the voice replied. "No traffic log." The headlights drew closer. I could see the shape of the car now. Older model. Boxy. Familiar. Too familiar. It was the same car from the night before. The dent. The flickering light. My pulse pounded in my ears. "Dispatch," I said louder now. "Vehicle approaching. Same as previous." The radio clicked. "This unit is aware," the voice said. "Do not engage." The car passed me slowly. Too slowly. The driver stared straight ahead. Knuckles white on the wheel. His face looked older now. More worn. Like time had kept moving for him. Even if the road hadn't. As he passed, his mouth moved. He was talking. I rolled down my window despite myself. The night air rushed in, cold and heavy. I couldn't hear the words. Just the shape of them. Over and over. "Help me." The car continued on, fading into the dark. I sat there shaking. The radio crackled again, softer this time. Almost gentle. "Unit 7, the voice said, you're falling behind schedule." "I'm not supposed to be here," I said. The words slipped out before I could stop them. "I don't work patrol anymore." Another pause. Then the voice sighed. "Neither do we." Something in that tone made my skin crawl. "What is this?" I asked. "Who am I talking to?" The static swelled, then cleared. "You know this stretch." The voice said, "You worked it before they closed it." "Closed it." I stared out at the road. "They never closed it." The voice didn't answer right away. When it did, it spoke slower, heavier, not officially. The headlights appeared again in the distance. Same spot as before, not moving closer, not moving away, just waiting. I felt trapped inside the truck, like the doors had sealed without me noticing. "I need to leave," I said, and shift. The radio crackled sharply. "Request denied." My chest tightened. "You can't deny that." "Already did," the voice replied. "Unit 7, return to pattern." "What pattern?" I asked. The headlights blinked. The road around me seemed to stretch, the darkness pulling wider, deeper. The voice came back, quieter now. "The one you never finished." I shut off the radio. The silence that followed was worse than the static. Too complete, like the world had muted itself. I turned the key and started the engine. The truck roared to life, loud and real. I pulled onto the road and drove. The headlights stayed where they were. The road didn't change. No exits, no signs, just asphalt and dark. The radio turned itself back on. "Unit 7, the voice said calmly. "Last call." I slammed my fist against it. The sound cut out. I don't remember how long I drove. Minutes, hours. It blurred together. Eventually, the sky lightened. Gray bled into blue. The dark loosened its grip. The road curved, just slightly. I gasped. A sharp sound torn out of me. An exit sign appeared ahead. Rusted, crooked. I took it without slowing. When I finally stopped, parked on the shoulder with my heart trying to beat out of my chest, the radio crackled one last time. The voice sounded tired. "Signal lost," it said. "Unit 7 unresponsive." The radio clicked off. I sat there until the sun rose fully, my hands resting uselessly on the wheel. Later, when I checked my notebook, there was a line written beneath my last entry. Different ink, different pressure, status unresolved. I don't carry a radio anymore, but sometimes when I drive at night and the road goes quiet, I swear I hear a voice through the static of my own thoughts, calling a unit number no one should remember, asking me to stand by. By the third night, I told myself I would not look in the rear-view mirror. That sounds small, I know, almost childish, but after the radio calls and the looping cars and the way the road refused to behave, I learned that looking at certain things only made them stronger, like giving them permission. So I focused forward. Same truck, same post. Same empty stretch of road with no exits and no mercy. Mile marker 77 stood where it always did. Paint chipped, numbers faded, like it had been rubbed thin by time. I parked facing north this time. I don't know why. It felt important. The engine idled low. The radio stayed off. I didn't even clip it to the dash. I left it in the glove box, like a bad memory I didn't want within reach. The road ahead was empty, calm, almost peaceful. For the first 30 minutes, nothing happened. No strange calls, no looping cars, no voices from the dark. I started to relax, just a little, enough to feel stupid again, enough to believe I might finish the shift without incident and finally be done with that place. Then I noticed a light. It wasn't bright, just a faint glow far back, caught in the edge of my peripheral vision. I ignored it at first. Cars pass all the time. That's what roads are for. But minutes went by. The glow stayed. I checked the clock. 12:18 a.m. I told myself not to look. I failed. I glanced at the rearview mirror. 2 headlights stared back at me. They were centered in the lane behind my truck, perfectly aligned, white and steady, not swerving, not bouncing, too steady. I watched them for a moment, waiting for the distance to change. It didn't. The lights didn't grow brighter. They didn't fade. They stayed exactly where they were, like they were painted onto the darkness. A slow chill crept up my spine. I looked forward again. Just another car, I whispered. Saying it out loud helped sometimes. I counted breaths. In, out, in, out. 5 minutes passed. I checked the mirror again. Same distance, same brightness, same position. My heart started to beat faster. Cars don't do that. They slow, they pass. They fall back. Even if someone's tailgating, you feel it. You sense the pressure of them wanting to move. These lights didn't want anything. They were just there. I eased my foot onto the brake, slowing the truck just a little. The lights slowed too, perfectly. I pressed harder, dropping 10 miles per hour. The lights matched me exactly. A thin line of sweat ran down my neck. Okay, I whispered. Okay. I accelerated. The truck surged forward. The engine growled. The lights stayed put. Not closer, not farther, like they were tied to me by an invisible string. I pulled over the shoulder. Gravel crunched beneath my tires. The truck rocked slightly as I stopped. The headlights behind me stopped too. I sat there, hands tight on the wheel, staring straight ahead. My chest felt tight, like there wasn't enough air inside me. I waited for the car to pass. It didn't. I waited for the driver to honk, to flash their lights, to do anything that proved there was a person back there. Nothing happened. Slowly, against every instinct I had, I turned my head and looked through the back window. I couldn't see the car, just the lights. No outline, no reflection, no shape around them. Just two headlights hanging in the dark. I felt something in me sink. Not real, I said quietly. You're not real. The lights flickered once. Just once. I reached for the door handle, then stopped. I don't know what I thought I would do if I got out. Talk to them? Wave them around me? Step into whatever that was? My hand dropped back to my lap. I tried the radio. I don't know why. I told myself I wouldn't. Static filled the cab, thick and loud. Then a voice slipped through. Not dispatch, not calm. It sounded strained, like someone talking through clenched teeth. Don't stop. I froze. Don't let it line up, the voice said. Who is this? I asked. The headlights brightened just a little. Drive, the voice urged. If it lines up, it stays. What stays? I demanded. The radio screamed with static and cut out. I slammed the door shut and pulled back onto the road, my heart pounding so hard it made my vision pulse. I drove, faster this time. The road stretched ahead, straight and endless. The headlights followed, always the same distance, always centered. I checked the side mirrors. Nothing there, just darkness and my own reflection staring back at me, pale and wide-eyed. Leave me alone, I whispered. The lights didn't respond. After a while, I noticed something else. They weren't headlights anymore. Not exactly. They were too round, too clean, too still. They didn't bounce with the road, didn't shake with speed. They watched. The thought hit me all at once, sharp and sickening. Those weren't lights on a car. They were eyes pretending to be lights. My stomach twisted. No! I breathed. The eyes blinked. I swerved. The truck fishtailed for a moment before I corrected it. Tires screaming against asphalt. My hands shook so badly I could barely keep control. The eyes stayed centered. No reaction. No change. Tears burned in my eyes. Half fear, half frustration. What do you want? I shouted. The road swallowed my voice. The mile marker passed on my right. Then another. Then another. Each one identical. Each one watching me pass. I started to feel tired. Bone-deep tired. Like I'd been driving for days instead of hours. My eyelids felt heavy. My thoughts slowed. The eyes behind me grew warmer. Softer. Almost comforting. I hated myself for noticing that. It's okay, a voice whispered. Not from the radio. From inside my head. You can slow down. I shook my head hard, like I could knock the thought loose. No, I said. No, no, no. I forced myself to focus on the road ahead, on the faint line where asphalt met dark. I searched for anything different. A curve, a sign, a flaw. Then, far ahead I saw it, a pair of headlights, coming toward me. Relief hit me so hard I laughed. A sharp, broken sound. Someone else. I said, thank God. The oncoming lights grew closer. The eyes behind me flickered. For the first time, they shifted. They fell back. Just a little. The oncoming car passed me in a rush of wind and sound, real and solid and loud. I caught a glimpse of the driver's face. He looked exhausted, terrified. As soon as the car passed, the eyes surged forward again, back to their perfect position. I screamed then. I didn't mean to. It just tore out of me. The road began to change. The darkness thinned. The sky lightened at the edges. Dawn. The eyes dimmed. They didn't vanish. They didn't retreat. They just faded, like something closing its eyes, satisfied. When the sun finally crested the horizon, the road looked normal again. Empty. Quiet. I pulled over and shut off the engine, my whole body shaking. In the silence, I checked the rear-view mirror one last time. Nothing. Just my own face, drawn and hollow. Later, when I finally made it home, I noticed something wrong with the truck. 2 faint circles were burned into the paint on the tailgate. Perfectly round. Perfectly spaced. Like something had been following too close for far too long. I quit that job the next day. I don't drive at night if I can help it. And when I do, I keep the mirror tilted just enough that I can't see what's behind me. Because some distances aren't meant to change. And some things don't need to catch you to stay with you. By the 4th morning, I knew I wasn't leaving that place the normal way. I watched the sun come up on the shoulder of the road, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel like they belonged to someone else. The sky shifted from black to gray to pale gold, and with each change, the night loosened its grip just a little. The fear didn't leave. It just settled deeper, like something that planned to stay. The road looked normal in daylight. That was the worst part. The asphalt stretched out clean and flat. The paint lines were faded but clear. The dirt on either side was dry and cracked. No shadows hiding in the distance. No headlights watching from behind. I stepped out of the truck and stood there, squinting into the morning light. Birds called somewhere far off. The world was waking up. I turned to my right. The mile marker was gone. I blinked and stepped closer to where it should have been. I knew the exact spot. I'd stared at that marker for hours. I could see it in my mind even now. Chip paint, crooked post, the number 77 rubbed thin. But the ground there was bare. No hole, no broken wood, no sign anything had ever been planted there. Just dirt and scrub grass. A slow, cold feeling crawled up my back. I walked a few steps up the road, then a few back. I scanned both sides, heart beating harder with every second. Nothing. The marker wasn't knocked over. It wasn't moved. It was gone. I stood there longer than I should have, hoping it would come back if I waited, like it had just slipped out of sight and needed time to settle. It didn't. I got back into the truck and pulled onto the road, driving slow now, careful, like the asphalt might give way if I trusted it too much. After a few minutes, I saw a sign ahead, an exit sign. Relief washed over me so fast it almost hurt. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding myself together until that moment. I took the exit and followed it until it led me to a small gas station just off the highway. One pump, one building, lights buzzing softly overhead. The man behind the counter looked half asleep. He barely glanced up when I walked in. "Morning," I said. My voice sounded rough, like I'd been screaming all night. He grunted in response. I grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler and set it on the counter. As he rang it up, I asked a question I've been holding back. "Hey," I said casually, trying not to sound desperate. "What mile marker is this?" He paused, fingers hovering over the register. "Mile marker?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, back on the highway. He frowned slightly. "Couldn't tell you." I nodded, pretending that was fine. "Do you know if there's a marker 77 out there?" The man looked up then, really looked at me. "No," he said slowly. "There's no 77 on that stretch." My mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Markers jump from 76 to 78. Been that way as long as I can remember." I laughed. I couldn't help it. It came out sharp and wrong. "That's not funny," I said. He didn't smile. "I'm not joking." I paid for the water and stepped back outside, my legs feeling weak. I sat in the truck and pulled out my phone. No service bars, but I didn't need them for what I wanted checked. I opened the map app. The blue dot showed my location clearly. The highway name was there. The exits were there. But when I zoomed in, there was no mile marker 77. The road didn't even have a break where it should have been. No odd bend. No note. No marker icon. Just a smooth, continuous stretch of highway. I scrolled back through the route history. The path I'd driven last night showed up as a straight line, uninterrupted, as if I'd never stopped, as if that place had never existed. My hands started to shake. No, I whispered. That's not right. I checked another app. Same thing. I searched online. Old maps. Archive data. Anything. Nothing. There was no record of a mile marker 77 on that road. I drove back toward where I knew it should be, my stomach twisting tighter with every mile. When I reached the spot, the road looked different. Not broken. Not damaged. Just newer. The asphalt was darker there. Smoother. Like it had been replaced recently. I parked and stepped out again, walking the shoulder slowly. That's when I saw it. A faint line in the pavement. Almost invisible unless you were looking for it. A seam that ran across the road, stretching from one side to the other, like something had been cut out. I knelt and pressed my hand against the asphalt. It was warm, even in the cool morning air. I pulled my hand back fast. I felt stupid, tired, angry. I got back in the truck and drove home. For the rest of the day, I tried to convince myself it was over, that whatever had happened out there was done now that the sun was up and the road had erased itself. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the headlights. The eyes, perfectly spaced, watching. Around 2 a.m., I got out of bed and turned on my computer. I searched for news articles, construction notices, detours, anything about road closures or changes. I found one thing, a scanned article from a local paper dated years ago. Temporary highway closure due to incident. No details, just a small paragraph. It mentioned a stretch of road removed from public access after a multi-vehicle accident. Records sealed. Area reopened later with updated measurements. The article didn't list the mile marker, but the length of road removed matched exactly where 77 should have been. My heart pounded. I scrolled further down. There was a comments section. Old. Archived. One comment stood out. Anyone else remember getting stuck out there? Radio wouldn't stop calling. No exits. Just loops. Another comment replied. Yeah, lost my partner on that shift. Dispatch said he cleared his post. Never came home. I shut the laptop and sat in the dark, breathing slow and shallow. The next morning, I checked my phone. There was a voicemail. No number. No timestamp. Just static at first. Then a familiar voice. Calm. Flat. Tired. Unit 7, it said. Segment decommissioned. I felt cold all over. The voice continued. Marker removed. Patrol discontinued. There was a pause. Then, softer, thank you for your service. The line went dead. I deleted the voicemail. I sold the truck a week later. I took a job that kept me indoors, under lights, surrounded by people. I avoid highways at night now. But sometimes when I drive during the day and the road goes quiet, I catch myself checking the shoulder, looking for a marker that shouldn't be there. And every once in a while, I swear I feel the road beneath me change. Just slightly, like it remembers me, like it's making sure I don't stop again. I got the assignment on a Tuesday morning. Printed on a thin sheet of paper that still smelled like warm ink. Temporary coverage. Closed wing. Overnight. That was it. No explanation. No warning. I'd been hospital security for 6 years by then. Night shifts mostly. I knew the place better than my own apartment. The sounds, the smells, the way the lights hummed differently depending on the floor. I dealt with drunks, grieving families, patients try to leave when they shouldn't. I wasn't jumpy. I wasn't new. So when my supervisor told me I'd be covering the North Wing, the one scheduled for demolition, I just nodded. Anything I should know? I asked, He didn't look up from his clipboard. Just keep the doors locked. Report anything unusual. That word again. Unusual. The north wing had been closed for years. I'd walked past it 100 times. Heavy double doors. Yellowed signs warning of structural damage. A long hallway beyond that always looked darker than it should. At 10 p.m., I swiped my badge and stepped inside. The air changed immediately. It smelled old, not rotten, just left behind, like dust and cleaning chemicals and something faintly metallic. The lights were on, but dimmed to half power. Emergency level, they called it. Enough to see, not enough to feel comfortable. My footsteps echoed too loudly. The hallway stretched longer than I remembered. Doors lined both sides, most of them sealed shut with red tape. Patient rooms, storage, old offices. At the far end was a nurse's station, frozen in time. Monitors dark, chairs pushed in. A calendar still hanging on the wall. The date was from 8 years ago. I told myself it was normal. They shut it down fast back then. Budget cuts, structural issues. That's what everyone said. I set my chair near the station and logged in on my tablet. Cameras were active, but half of them showed nothing but static. The others gave grainy views of empty hallways and locked doors. Around midnight, the building settled. Pipes knocked somewhere deep in the walls. I heard the distant whine of an elevator, though there wasn't one in this wing. I checked the cameras again. Still empty. I leaned back and let my thoughts drift. Bills, groceries, whether I'd remember to lock my car. That's when I heard it. A sound down the hall. Soft, rhythmic, like footsteps. I sat up straight. The sound stopped. I listened, holding my breath. The lights hummed. The air vent rattled. Hello. I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I wanted. No answer. I stood and walked slowly down the hall, flashlight in hand. I checked doors as I passed. All sealed, all quiet. Halfway down, I noticed something new. One door wasn't taped shut. Room 317. The tape hung loose, torn cleanly down the middle. I felt a prickle of unease. I knew they'd sealed every room. I'd seen it myself years ago. I pushed the door open. The room was empty. Bed gone. Equipment removed. Just bare walls and a single chair in the corner. But the floor was scuffed. Fresh marks, like something heavy had been dragged. I stepped back into the hallway and checked my radio. North wing check. I said, I've got an unsecured room. Static answered. I tried again. Nothing. I told myself it was interference. The wing was old. Thick walls. Dead zones. I taped the doors shut myself and went back to station. The rest of the night passed slowly. Too slowly. I kept thinking I heard movement just beyond the edge of the lights. A shadow where there shouldn't be one. A sense of being watched. But nothing else happened. At 6 a.m., my relief arrived. I didn't mention the room. I just wanted to go home. The next night, I was back. Same wing. Same chair. Same smell. This time, I brought coffee. Around 1 a.m., the monitors flickered. One of the cameras came online. Camera 12. It showed the far end of the hall. Something was standing there. I leaned closer to the screen. It looked like a person. Tall, thin, facing away from the camera. My heart started to pound. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down the hall, keeping my eyes on the end point, the spot from the camera. When I reached it, there was nothing there, but the door behind me creaked. I turned. Room 317 was open again. The tape lay on the floor in neat strips, like it had been peeled off carefully. Inside, the chair was no longer in the corner. It sat in the center of the room, facing the door. I backed away slowly, every instinct screaming at me to leave, to call someone, anyone. My radio crackled. A voice came through, soft, calm. Security? I almost cried with relief. Yes, I'm in the North Wing. I need assistance. There was a pause. Then the voice said, that wing is closed. I know, I said. I'm assigned here. Another pause. We don't have anyone assigned there, the voice replied. My mouth went dry. I got the paperwork. Silence. Then, very quietly, "Please exit the area." The radio went dead. I didn't argue. I walked fast, not running, all the way back to the doors. I didn't look back. I didn't check the cameras. I swiped my badge. The doors didn't open. I swiped again. Nothing. I felt panic rise in my chest. Then, behind me, I heard breathing. Slow, labored, close. I turned. The hallway lights flickered, just once. When they steadied, the chair from the room was in the hall, 10 feet away, facing me. I don't remember unlocking the doors. I don't remember running. I remember daylight hitting my face and my knees giving out. They took me off duty after that. Said I needed rest. Evaluation. The north wing was sealed again. Demolition moved up. No one asked me for a report. No one mentioned room 317. Sometimes when I walk past that section of the hospital, I swear I hear footsteps behind the walls, waiting, like the assignment was never really temporary. I wasn't sure what time it was when it started, but it didn't matter. Time had a way of stretching thin in that wing, like the fluorescent lights were pulling it out of shape minute by minute. I had taken my post near the old nurses' station again. The monitors were quiet. Empty hallways on every screen. Everything normal, or as normal as a closed hospital wing could be. The smell of disinfectant and old carpet hung heavy in the air, and somewhere far off, I thought I heard the faint clink of a cart rolling over tile that didn't exist anymore. At first, I chalked it up to echoes. The wing had been abandoned for years. Floors and walls weren't straight. Sound didn't travel the way it should. But then I heard it again, closer. A soft, deliberate drag across the linoleum. Wheelchairs. I froze. I know that sounds ridiculous. There were no patients here. None. The entire wing was supposed to be stripped bare. Beds gone. Charts shredded. Equipment removed years ago. And yet, I could hear the wheels creaking down the hallway. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it down the corridor. The beam cut through the darkness, bouncing off the walls. Empty. Nothing. But the sound kept coming. Rolling closer. Turning corners. Sometimes stopping as if it was listening to me, then moving again. I told myself to breathe, that it was old equipment settling. Maybe a loose wheel on a cart, a janitor somewhere far off. But I'd walked the hallways plenty of times. Nothing in that wing made a sound on its own anymore. I stepped forward, footsteps echoing with mine. The drag of wheels followed. I passed room 312. Empty. Room 313. Empty. I kept expecting something obvious. Someone standing at the end of the hall, a janitor cart, a maintenance worker, but there was nothing. Only the sound that grew more distinct. Then I saw it. A wheelchair. It was slowly moving down the hall, toward me. No one in it. No hands on the wheels. Just rolling steadily. Perfectly aligned in the center of the corridor. My pulse spiked, my stomach tightened. I wanted to look away, wanted to deny it, but my eyes stayed fixed. The chair paused a few feet from me. The air felt heavier, thicker, and I noticed something I hadn't before, a faint beeping. Monitors. They were on. Not the cameras. The real medical monitors that had been disconnected for years. Flat lines had returned. Beeps came to the faint hum of the lights. Slow and irregular, like a heartbeat trying to start after years of silence. I swallowed hard. My hand shook as I raised the flashlight, shining on the chair. Empty. I took a step back. The chair moved with me, gliding closer, stopping when I stopped, moving when I moved. I thought I could control it by walking faster. I tried. My boots pounded the linoleum, breathing ragged in my chest. The chair matched my speed. I realized then it wasn't a chair. Not really. Not something meant to sit in. It was a presence. A shape, using the form of a wheelchair to make sense in the world I knew. I backed up to the nurse's station, trying to keep my eyes on it. Monitors were beeping louder now. Random noises that shouldn't have been possible in a decommissioned wing. Oxygen alarms. Faint electronic heartbeats. The distant hiss of a ventilator powering up. Then doors started unlocking. A small office door clicked. Then another, and another. Each one swung open slowly, almost lazily, like the wing was breathing around me. No wind, no one touching them, no keycard swiped. I pressed my back against the counter and watched. Wheelchairs were rolling in every hallway now, empty, but each moving with purpose, converging slowly toward the center of the wing. I tried the radio. Security, North Wing, what's happening? I need assistance. Static, then nothing. I ran through my head the procedures. I should evacuate. I should call the front desk. I should get the fire alarm. But my voice felt trapped in my throat. My feet felt heavy. The wing seemed to stretch longer, corridors bending slightly when I turned my head, just enough to keep me inside. A monitor screen flickered. A patient chart appeared. It was blank. Name missing. Date of birth missing. Only a patient number. Flatline. And then, impossibly, a room number that didn't exist appeared next to it. I leaned closer. The chart updated itself. Heart rate increasing. Blood pressure rising. Oxygen levels dropping. Alarms sounding on the monitor that wasn't plugged in. My own reflection stared back on the screen, wide-eyed, sweat-drenched, hands trembling. The chair rolled closer again, perfectly silent this time. I thought I saw someone or something sit in it briefly, just a shadow in the corner, and then it vanished. The wheel kept moving. I scrambled to my flashlight, shining it down one hallway after another. Each turn I took revealed another chair, empty but intentional. Monitors lit up in rooms I knew had been stripped bare. The beeps came faster now, louder, echoing, overlapping. I realized I had no idea how long I'd been here. Hours? Minutes? It could have been a dream forming into reality. My own heartbeat sounded deafening. I backed into the corner of the station and sat on the floor. The chairs were everywhere now, converging slowly into center. Monitors flashed patient numbers. Rooms unlocked themselves. Doors swung open as if inviting me in. And then a voice. Soft, far away, yet somehow inside my skull. Do you remember them? I shook my head. My voice cracked. No, I don't. A chair moved right in front of me. Empty, but the air around it felt thick, heavy, charged. I could feel the presence. Hundreds of silent patients, waiting, watching, waiting for acknowledgement, waiting for someone to notice. The beeping slowed. The wheelchair stopped, perfectly aligned. Door stayed open. The monitors froze. The voice whispered again. Closer this time. They never left. Neither did you. I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. Eventually, the night ended. I don't remember the relief arriving. I don't remember leaving the wing. I only know the next morning, I was back at the front desk, badge in hand, shaking. My supervisor looked at me like I'd lost it. No one believed me. No one checked the cameras. No one mentioned room 317 or the old charts or the empty wheelchairs moving silently down the hall. I asked for a transfer the next day. Anything to stay away from that wing. But I still hear them sometimes. Not in the day. Not when people are around. Late at night, the sound of a wheelchair rolling down an empty hall. Monitors beeping. Doors unlocking themselves. Shadows moving just out of sight. And I remember every patient I never charted. Every room I never truly emptied. They're still there. And so am I. I still remember the moment I stepped into the elevator. Even though I've tried to push it from my mind. It was quiet. Almost unnervingly so, like the hum of the building itself had paused to watch me. The elevator doors were scratched and old, the metal worn smooth from decades of use. A small panel of buttons blinked weakly under the dim fluorescent light. Only a handful of floors lit up. The upper floors were dark, blacked out, marked with a red X as if the building had swallowed them whole. I shouldn't have even been near them. They'd been removed decades ago when that wing of the hospital was condemned, sealed off, erased from all maps and schedules. But there I was, temporary assignment, night shift, alone, and something in me thought maybe I could finally check those floors myself. I pressed the button for the highest accessible floor, just as I always did. The doors closed with a slow, reluctant scrape. The cabin shivered under my weight. At first, it was normal. slow upward movement. The familiar hum of cables and motors. I felt my chest relax, the tension of walking empty corridors easing. Then, halfway to the top, the doors didn't open. The lights flickered. The elevator jolted. Not like the sudden stops you expect when the machinery fails. This was deliberate. A small, controlled lurch, just enough to make my stomach drop. I pressed the buttons. Nothing responded. The panels showed the same floors as before. Floor 7, 8, 9, but then above 9 a button glowed. Not just a light indicator, but a floor I didn't recognize. Unmarked. Blank. It pulsed faintly like it was alive. I pressed it. The elevator shuddered and began moving again, upward, faster, not violently, but with a determined rhythm, like it had somewhere go, a place it remembered that I shouldn't. I felt the walls close in. My pulse spiked. There was no sound but the hum of the motor and my own ragged breathing. The air smelled different, too. Not the antiseptic of the floors below. Not the faint mildew of empty corridors. It was heavy metallic, faintly sweet, like blood and rust and wet stone. I pressed the emergency stop. Nothing. I pounded the button. I tried the phone. No signal. No dial tone. Not even static. The floor counter climbed past the highest official level. 10, 11, 12. I didn't even know the building had that many floors. And then 13. The elevator stopped showing numbers altogether. Just a blank red light where the next floor should have been. I pressed the panel repeatedly. The door stayed closed. The hum became louder, almost like a voice vibrating under the metal, a low thrum against my bones. I leaned against the wall and tried to breathe slowly. Think, reason. It's an old elevator. Maybe the cab is stuck in the system. A mechanical glitch. A hallucination brought on by fatigue. But then I heard it. The soft, slow creak of doors opening somewhere above. No announcements. No emergency alarm. Just the sound of a door swinging, groaning under weight. The hum changed. It became a rhythm now, almost matching the sound of footsteps, though I couldn't see anyone. I tried to shut my eyes. Maybe if I didn't look, it wouldn't matter. But that only made the hum worse, vibrating in my chest. The panel lights flickered. And then, suddenly, the elevator lurched again. This time, harder, like it had decided, it had chosen. And I was along for the ride. A floor appeared on the display. Unmarked, of course. But I knew it. I'd seen pictures, architectural drawings, files that no one talked about anymore. This floor didn't exist. Not in plans. Not in memory. And yet here it was. The doors opened. I swear I felt the air shift as if the elevator exhaled. A cold, wet draft. It smelled of mildew, decay, and something older. Something alive. The corridor outside was familiar, but wrong. Everything was the same shape, the same design, but darker, as if the light from the elevator dimmed the hallway in a way reality shouldn't allow. The floor tiles had cracks that I knew didn't exist. Rusted handrails, peeling paint. The silence was absolute. No hum of machinery. No distant alarms. Only the sound of my own boots against the floor. I stepped out cautiously. The elevator doors didn't close. Not fully. They stayed ajar, pulsing lightly, almost breathing. I walked the corridor. Rooms lined the hallway. Patient rooms, offices, supply closets, but none were marked. No numbers. No signs. Nothing official. The air was colder here. Each step felt heavier, like the building itself was pressing down on me. I tried to open the door. Locked. Nothing moved, except a faint whisper, almost at the end of the hall. I froze. I strained my ears. Hello? No answer. I stepped forward, flashlight sweeping the walls. Shadows twisted in corners. Not just normal shadows, but shapes like silhouettes waiting. Waiting for me. I passed a room with a cracked window. Inside I saw it, a figure sitting in the corner, not fully formed, blurred around the edges. Watching. I swallowed hard, forcing my feet to move. I had to check. I had to confirm. The figure didn't move. Just waited. I reached the room. Empty. Not even a chair. Nothing. Only the smell, metallic, damp, sickly. I stumbled back into the corridor. The elevator doors, my only exit, were gone. Just wall. Solid. The hum from before returned. Softer this time. Surrounding me. Vibrating through the walls and floor. I tried to retrace my steps. The hallway stretched endlessly. Not curved. Not twisted. Endless. Every turn looked identical. Every shadow seemed to move when I blinked. Footsteps. I heard them behind me. Slow. Measured. Not my own. I spun around. Nothing. The whisper returned. Closer now. Do you remember? I shook my head. My voice cracked. I don't. Another step. Another whisper. You've been here before. I stumbled down the corridor, heart hammering. Doors open and close themselves as I passed. Lights flickered. Monitors, long removed, blinked on in rooms I knew had been stripped years ago. Static hum. Pulse. Alarm. Nothing consistent. Just noise and time of my panic. I tried the emergency phone. Nothing. The wall where it had been installed looked smooth, untouched, like it had never existed. I ran, my flashlight beam shaking, catching only glimpses of the endless corridor. The hum grew louder, vibrating under my skin. I knew then the elevator didn't want me to leave. The building didn't want me to leave. And then I saw the elevator again. Down at the far end, the doors pulsing, still open. My relief was immediate but short-lived as I ran toward it. The floor shifted slightly beneath my boots. I caught glimpses of rooms appearing and disappearing, walls bending as if breathing. I dove through the doors. The elevator shuddered. The doors closed. I pressed every button frantically. The cab lurched, vibrating, groaning, lights flickering. But I was moving. Down. Down. I didn't dare look at the panel. I didn't dare breathe too slowly. Finally, with a jolt, the cab stopped. Doors opened. Familiar hallway. My floor. Normal lights. Dust in the corners. Paint peeling. Just like it always had been. I bolted out, swiping my badge, taking the stairs instead of the elevator for the rest of the night. The next morning, I checked the building plans, archives, maintenance logs. Floor 12, floor 13, all removed, condemned, erased decades ago. No record of patient rooms. No elevators accessing that wing. Nothing. Yet, I still see it in my dreams. The elevator doors, pulsing lightly. The hum vibrating beneath my chest. The whisper. Do you remember? I never go near elevators at night anymore. Not in hospitals. Not anywhere. Because some floors aren't meant to be touched. Some elevators don't stop. And some buildings never forget the people who walk their halls. I never thought a camera could make you feel so exposed. Not the kind in a hospital. Anyway, I'd walk the halls. I'd patrol the wings. I'd stared at monitors more nights than I cared to count. And I'd always thought I was alone. That night proved me wrong. It started like any other shift. The hospital was quiet, mostly. The usual low hum of the HVAC, the distant beep of machines somewhere, the faint shuffling of night janitorial staff that passed by without notice. My post was near the security office, tucked into the corner with a bank of monitors. Closed wings, empty corridors. Lights dimmed to save power. Nothing unusual. I patrolled the hallways first. Standard procedure. I passed room after room, empty beds, chairs pushed in, floors polished but cold. I checked doors. Locked. Windows sealed. Everything normal. My radio was dead quiet. No calls. No alarms. I went back to the office, tired but alert. Sat down in the chair, fingers tapping the desk, coffee in hand. That's when I noticed it. A flicker on the monitors. Small, almost too subtle to notice. I leaned closer. Camera 3. Wing B. Hallway 2. I checked that hall an hour ago. Empty. And now not empty. A figure stood at the far end of the corridor. Back straight. Arms hanging loosely, no movement. Too dark to see a face. Too still to be a person patrolling. I squinted, telling myself it was a shadow, a trick of the low light. But then it shifted. Just a fraction. A lean to the left, a head turning slightly. I felt my chest tighten. Probably one of the cleaning staff. I muttered. Late shift, didn't hear me come back. I grabbed my radio. Called out. Security to Wing B. Are you there? Static. No answer. I walked to the corridor in question. Nothing. Empty. Hallway silent. The hum of the building the only sound. I scanned the length. Flashlight trembling in my hand. Nothing. No figure. No shadow. Not even a reflection in the polished floor. I laughed nervously. Get a grip? I whispered. You've been staring at the monitors too long. I went back to the office. Monitors flickered again. Same figure. Same position. Not moving. Not even breathing, as far as I could tell. Just standing there. Watching. Waiting. I checked the other cameras. Nothing unusual anywhere else. Only camera 3. Only that hallway. I sat down again. Coffee shaking in my hand. I tried to convince myself it was fatigue. Maybe I was seeing something in the grain of the video feed. Then the figure moved again. Closer. I froze. My stomach turned over. My heart hammered. The monitor showed the figure walking. Not quickly. Not running. Just stepping forward, measured, deliberate. I checked the hallway in person again. Still empty. Still silent. No sound of footsteps. No door opening. No echo. Nothing. I backed into the office, trying to tell myself it was a glitch. The camera feed was old, grainy, maybe delayed, maybe a frozen frame. I grabbed my tablet, reviewed the footage, frame by frame. Every frame showed it. The figure, standing behind me, always just out of reach of the camera angle, but always there, watching, waiting. I twisted in my chair. Empty office. My reflection in the monitor looked back at me, pale, wide-eyed, sweaty. I wanted to leave, to bolt, but something held me there. Something deep in my chest that refused to let me run without knowing what it was. I reviewed the timestamp. 1 hour. 2 hours. 3. The figure had been there the entire time, standing behind me, motionless until I looked at the monitor, then moving forward. My hand shook as I typed a report. I had to document it. This wasn't a hallucination. Not entirely. The footage existed. It proved it. I glanced over my shoulder. Empty. Silence. I laughed again, bitterly, shaking my head. It's not real. It can't be real. But the feeling didn't leave. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight. My spine tingled like electricity. I felt a presence, a weight pressing down behind me, just where the camera had shown it. I tried to focus on the monitors, coffee in hand, staring at the grainy black and white hallway. The figure moved again. It wasn't walking this time. It was closer, closer than physically possible. I twisted around. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I could see the far end clearly. The doors closed, lights dim. No one there. I looked back at the monitor, frame by frame. There it was, standing directly behind me. I jumped up. My chair scraped against the floor. My flashlight swung wildly. I pounded on the desk, heart racing. Show yourself. I shouted. No response. Only the monitor, grainy and unblinking. The figure didn't move toward the camera this time. It didn't step forward. It simply waited. Hours passed. Or maybe minutes. Time felt broken. Every time I glanced at the monitor, the figure was closer. Every time I glanced at the hallway, it was gone. But I felt it. Always there. By 4 a.m., my nerves were shredded. I didn't touch the camera feeds. I didn't check the hallway. I just sat, holding the flashlight, pretending the office walls could keep it out. When relief finally arrived, I staggered out of the office. My supervisor glanced at me with concern, but I couldn't speak. I couldn't explain. The figure wasn't there now. Only in the monitors. Only in the frames that no one would believe. I went home that morning, slept with the lights on, dreamt of empty hallways, long and endless, shadows stretching and bending, someone standing always just behind me. The next night, I checked the footage, frame by frame, hour by hour. There was again. Same figure. Same waiting. Standing behind me through every patrol. I quit that assignment. Requested transfer. Avoided the wing entirely. But the cameras never forgot. I could still see it when I closed my eyes. Standing behind me. Watching. Waiting. Even now, months later, I feel it. Not in dreams. Not in the footage. But when I walk quiet corridors at night, the weight presses on my back. A presence that doesn't move. Doesn't speak. Doesn't leave. I was never alone. And I still can't shake that fact. I still remember the first time I walked into that factory at midnight. The streetlights outside did little to soften the black metal walls, and the chain link fence around the perimeter cast long, jagged shadows across the cracked pavement. The air smelled like oil and rust, and that smell alone set my teeth on edge. I'd been looking for work for a while. Overnight security jobs didn't usually pay much, but this one offered a rate I couldn't ignore. Almost double what I made at my old post. Third shift incentive. The hiring manager had called it. No questions asked, no experience required beyond a basic badge, and a willingness to sit through 12 hours of silence. When I arrived, the parking lot was empty except for a single security truck and a motionless gate. The hiring manager, a tall man in a navy jacket, handed me a set of keys and a radio. Patrol the main floor, check the perimeters, keep an eye on the loading docks, he said. Nothing unusual ever happens, but if it does, report it immediately. He smiled, not warm, not friendly, just fixed, like a mannequin with teeth. I nodded, took the keys, walked inside. The factory smelled worse inside. Cold metal and machinery hung in the air, even though nothing ran. Lights overhead hummed faintly, the only sound in the vast, cavernous space. I flicked on my flashlight and started my rounds. The first floor was empty. Machines lined up in perfect rows, covered in dust, some with tarps. Conveyor belts still had traces of oil. I checked the doors to the storage areas. Locked. No movement anywhere. I told myself it was normal. Nothing ever moved here after the day crew left. I walked to the loading docks. The giant metal doors were closed, bolted, and the chains rattled faintly in the draft. Nothing unusual. I found the security office on the second floor and settled in. I sat in the chair, radio on my lap, flashlight by my side, checking the monitors. Most cameras were dead. Grainy black and white static filled the screens. A few worked, showing empty hallways, doors closed, shadows still. At first, the night was boring. Monotony settled over me like a heavy blanket. I tried to keep alert by pacing, checking doors, peering into storage rooms. Every sound, every squeak of metal made me flinch, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Around 2 a.m, I heard it, a soft, dragging noise faint, like someone pulling a cart or sliding a crate across the floor. I froze, straining my ears. The factory was empty. Only I was here. I grabbed my flashlight and moved toward the sound. Hallways stretched endlessly, machines looming like silent sentinels. Nothing. I circled back, checking rooms, doors, stairwells. Empty. The dragging sound stopped. I waited, holding my breath. The hum of the lights and the soft wind from the vents were the only noises. I told myself I imagined it. Fatigue, too much coffee, too many lonely nights watching monitors and empty halls. I returned to the security office. My hands were shaking, but I tried to focus on the monitors. That's when I saw it, on camera 7, one of the rarely functional feeds. A figure at the far end of the hallway. Dark, tall, still, too still. My stomach tightened. I leaned closer, blinked. The figure was gone. But the hallway, I knew it was empty. I checked every door. All locked, all quiet. I told myself it was a shadow, a trick of the grainy footage. But the image flickered again. The figure reappeared. Slightly closer this time. Closer than before. My pulse quickened. I picked up the radio. Security! Anyone in the main floor? Static. I pressed the emergency button. Nothing. I stepped out of the office. Flashlights sweeping the hallways. Each turn revealed the same emptiness, I'd seen 100 times before. Yet, my gut screamed something was wrong. Then I saw a movement. A shadow flickered at the end of a long corridor, stretching and twisting unnaturally, almost as if it had no right to be human. I raised the flashlight. Empty. Nothing. I stumbled back toward the office, trying to tell myself I was being paranoid. I wanted to leave. I wanted to quit, but the pay kept my legs moving. The high rate had felt like a lifeline when I was desperate. It now felt like a trap. The shadow appeared again, this time in the corner of the office, just beyond the glow of the monitor light. I froze. Every instinct screamed to run, but my body refused. I blinked. It was gone, but I felt it, watching, waiting. The rest of the night dragged on. Every sound echoed unnaturally. Every draft felt like a hand brushing my neck. I kept my flashlight close, my eyes scanning, my ears straining for the faintest noise. By dawn, I was exhausted. Sweat ran down my face, and my hands were raw from gripping the flashlight. The factory was empty again, silent, as if the previous hours had never existed. I walked outside into the pale light of morning. The hiring manager was there, waiting, smiling that same fixed smile. "First night okay?" he asked. I nodded weakly. "Yeah, just quiet." He laughed softly. "It's always quiet. That's the beauty of the night shift. No interruptions, no witnesses, and the pay as promised." I looked at my paycheck. Still high, still irresistible. I told myself I'd get used to it, that the dragging sounds, the shadows, the flickering images on the cameras, they were just the building settling, the wind, my imagination. But I never got used to it. Every night after that, I felt the weight of unseen eyes, the soft scrape of something moving just beyond my flashlight, the hum of machines that had long since stopped. The building felt alive, and it watched me with patience, waiting to see how long it would take before I noticed I wasn't alone. By the third week, I realized the incentive wasn't for me to stay awake. It was to see if I would notice, if I would last through the night, if I would understand that some places pay you well not because the work is hard, but because something inside wants to make sure you know exactly who owns the night. And that night, as I patrolled the endless halls, I felt it, watching, waiting, and I understood with a cold certainty that the factory had hired me not for security, but for observation. I was not the one in control. I never had been, and the high pay was just the beginning of the cost. I remember the first time it happened. I had been patrolling the main floor, flashlight in hand, radio clipped to my shoulder, coffee in a thermos by my side. The factory was quiet that night, colder than usual, metal surfaces gleaming under the weak overhead lights. I told myself it was just the time of year. Early winter, air dry, machines cooling in the empty halls. I passed the assembly line, a row of massive presses, and conveyor belts that hadn't been used in years. Dust covered everything, thick and gray, the kind that makes you cough even to the tiniest sniff. I ran a hand over one of the controls. Cold, dead. Nothing moved. Nothing had moved in months, maybe years. Then it started, a low, steady hum. Faint at first, like the factory was breathing under its own skin. My flashlight flickered, catching the edges of a press down the line. I froze. The hum grew louder. My heart jumped. The press moved, slowly, not a shudder or a jerk, but a smooth mechanical glide, like it remembered its work. Pistons slid down, gears turned, rollers rolled. No operators, no power cables feeding it. I looked at the breaker panels. Everything shut down. Lights dim, switches off. I stepped back. This can't be. I shined the flashlight along the line. One by one, other machines woke. Conveyors rolled, hoppers rattled, presses thumped rhythmically. No noise from motors or generators. Nothing plugged in, nothing turned on. And yet, they moved. I gripped my radio tightly. Security to nothing. Static, dead, not a sound. I forced myself to keep walking. Past the hum, past the machines, past the endless noise that had no source. I tried to tell myself it was vibration, wind, settling metal, but that didn't explain the rhythmic pounding of pistons, the rollers spinning steadily as if someone were feeding parts through the line. I reached the center of the floor. My flashlight caught a conveyor belt fully loaded with boxes I had checked earlier. Empty. Dust on top. Nothing inside. Now, neat stacks slid along as if being filled. No hands. No mechanism I could see. Just movement. I backed away, shaking. Cold sweat ran down my face. I could hear the metal clanking, soft but deliberate, echoes bouncing off walls like whispers. The factory wasn't quiet anymore. Not really. Every machine had its own voice now. Low, mechanical, patient. Listening. Waiting. I stumbled toward the stairwell. I needed to see the upper floor, or at least get out of there. I needed to know if it was just the ground level or the entire building. The stairwell was empty. The handrails cold and smooth. I climbed slowly, each step echoing too loudly, mingling with the noise below. At the top landing, the overhead lights flickered. My flashlight caught shadows moving across the walls. Not mine, not real. I reached the catwalk, overlooking the main floor. My stomach turned. Every machine was running now. Conveyor belts moving parts. Presses stamping metal, arms swinging, hoppers rattling. All alive without electricity, without hands. And then I saw it. A large robotic arm. The kind used to move heavy crates. Lifted slowly from its cradle. It moved toward me. I froze. Every instinct screaming to step back. It didn't swing wildly. It didn't lunge. It moved deliberately, measured, like it had been trained, like it remembered the exact path. I backed away, heart hammering, flashlight shaking in my hand. The arm stopped, paused, then returned to its original position, as though nothing had happened. I realized something then. It wasn't random. The machines weren't malfunctioning. They were aware. I ran down the stairs, trying to get a better look at the presses and rollers. Every machine I passed had its own rhythm, its own sequence. Conveyors loaded boxes. Presses stamped, arms swung. But nothing was on them. Nothing moving through the process. Everything empty, yet fully operational. The hum was deafening now, vibrating through my chest. I could feel it in my teeth, in my stomach. The floor under my boots throbbed with energy that didn't belong. I checked the panels again. All breakers off. Main power disconnected. No circuits active. Nothing should be moving. And yet it did. I tried the radio. Again, nothing. Static that hissed in my ears, cutting out completely when I pressed the emergency button. I moved closer to one of the presses. Dust rose from the floor as it descended. I noticed the prints. Fresh marks. Footprints along the floor that weren't mine. I hadn't walked there. They were too large, heavy, not human. I swallowed hard. Every instinct told me to leave. I wanted to run. I wanted to call someone. But my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, watching the impossible. A conveyor belt in front of me shifted abruptly. Boxes fell off in perfect alignment. One landed at my feet. I picked it up. Empty. No markings. Just cardboard. And yet I felt watched. I moved down the aisle between machines. Each press, each roller, each conveyor seemed to pulse, alive in its own way. I felt a presence behind me, following silently. Not a shadow, not a person. Something that moved in rhythm with the machinery. I turned, flashlight sweeping the floor. Empty. Only the hum. Only the clank of gears moving by themselves. The stairwell I'd used to reach the catwalk was gone. Or at least, I couldn't see it. The landing stretched further than it should have. Hallway after hallway of machinery. Some old, some newer, all alive. Every machine had its own heartbeat. And they were aware I was here. I backed away slowly. The robotic arm lifted again, higher this time, swinging slightly in my direction. Not fast, not violent, but deliberate, watching me, testing me. I made a decision. I had to leave. Now, not in a minute, not after a few more looks. I ran toward the nearest exit. I remembered, flashlight beam bouncing frantically. Conveyor belts shifted beneath my feet, as if adjusting to block me. Presses thumped in rhythm with my heartbeat, keeping pace, matching my steps. I tripped, falling hard. The air smelled metallic. like burnt circuits. I scrambled up. The machines didn't stop. They moved around me now, creating aisles and walls, guiding me, corralling me like I was part of some experiment. I reached the front doors. Locked. No power. No way to open them manually. My flashlight flickered and died. Pitch black. Only the hum remained, deep resonant, vibrating to the floor and walls. I pressed my hands against the door. Nothing. I shouted. My voice echoed and bounced back, distorted. The machines pulsed in response. I felt it more than heard it. A presence, patient, alive, watching. And then it stopped. Silence. The factory was empty again. Lights flickered weakly, just enough to see the floor and doors. My radio hummed back to life. Static. Safe, normal static. I didn't wait. I found a side exit, forced it open, ran to my truck in the parking lot. The night air hit me hard, cold, and I gasped for breath. Behind me, the factory loomed. Silent, empty, lifeless. But I knew better. I didn't return the next night. I didn't answer calls for extra shifts. The pay didn't matter. I knew the machines weren't broken. They were awake. They were aware. They moved with purpose, without operators, without power, and I had walked among them. And the thought that chilled me most? That something had followed me that night. Not in the trucks outside. Not in the office. Something from within. Something that waited inside the machinery. Patient, counting, remembering. I quit security work after that. For good. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear it. The hum, the clank, the heavy weight of machines moving on their own. And I know that somewhere deep inside that factory, the machines are still awake, still aware, and they remember me. I didn't notice it at first. Not the little things. Not the way the night dragged differently in this place. The factory had always been quiet at midnight. The machinery resting. The floors empty. The only sound my boots against concrete. But there was a rhythm to the nights I had worked. A hidden pattern I didn't understand until it was too late. That night, I was checking the time cards in the security office. Just routine. The logs were on a dusty clipboard, stacked in a corner, pages curling with age. I flipped through them like I had 100 times before. Names, shifts, punch in and punch out times. Neat handwriting fading into smudges and illegibility. Every few pages, the same thing caught my eye. Nobody ever quit. I stared at the list, thinking it was a misprint, a clerical oversight. Surely someone must have quit. People leave jobs all the time. But the more I flipped, the more names I recognized. Some were long gone, their faces etched in the faded memory of HR photos. Others I had never met, not in this lifetime. It felt, and none of them had an official resignation. None of them had left, in the way we understand leaving. I frowned. My hands shook as I lifted the flashlight higher, shining it across the room. The office smelled of mildew and coffee, old ink and dust. Everything else was normal. Chairs tucked in, the radio quiet, monitors flicker with the empty factory halls. Normal. Too normal. I leaned back in my chair and tried to think it through. Maybe it was an accident of record keeping. Maybe a payroll quirk. But something in my chest tightened, a cold grip that refused to release. I glanced around. The walls of the security office were lined with monitors showing every corner of the factory. Empty halls stretched endlessly, rows of machines standing still. I tried to focus on the present, telling myself the logs were just old records, nothing more. But then I heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps. Not in the halls, but in the office. My pulse spiked. I swung around, flashlight trembling. Empty. The air was still. The faint hum of fluorescent lights was the only sound. I forced a laugh. Just your imagination, I muttered. Late night, too much coffee, too many hours staring at empty halls. I returned to the logs. The names kept coming, page after page. Every single one of them, long shifts, third shift incentive. Nothing marked for resignation or termination. They had all ended their employment in ways that didn't make sense. I flipped back a few pages. Some names were decades old. Others were more recent, within the last few months. I recognized a few, old faces of night shift security guards, operators, even maintenance staff. People who had vanished without notice. I put my hand on the radio, considering calling someone, any one of my supervisors. But I hesitated. What could I say? The records are wrong. Nobody has ever quit. They would think I was joking. They would think I was paranoid. And yet, I felt it. Something pressing behind the walls. Something patient, waiting. Not in the hallways, not in the offices, but in the system itself. The building knew. It remembered everyone who had ever walked these halls. I stood and walked the monitors, checking the empty corridors. Nothing moved. The factory was quiet again. The machinery silent. The air cold and still. I tried to shake the feeling creeping up my spine. The sense that someone or something was watching me as I realized the truth. Nobody ever left this place on their own. I stepped out into the main floor, flashlight cutting a thin line through darkness. The machines were still. Presses, conveyors, robotic arms, silent. My boots echoed across concrete. I checked every door, every storage room, every office. Locked. Empty. I felt a presence behind me, subtle, almost imagined, but the hair on my neck stood on end. I spun, flashlight sweeping the floor. Empty. Nothing moved. I forced myself to breathe slowly, logically, rationally. There had to be a reason. Perhaps the records were a quirk of accounting. Perhaps the people had left quietly, through back doors, during day shifts. Maybe I was just tired. But then I noticed the shadows. Tiny, almost imperceptible, shifting in the corners of my vision. Not normal shadows. Not cast by the lights. They bent unnaturally, stretching longer than the object around them, twisting just slightly when I blinked. I glanced at the time card logs again. One name after another, older and older, stretching back decades. No record of resignation. No exit dates. Just final shifts ending mid-sentence, mid-record, like the system had decided to stop writing for them. I felt my stomach twist. My hands shook as I pushed the clipboard away. The office seemed to tilt slightly, walls narrowing, monitors flickering. My own reflection in the dark screen stared back at me, pale and tense, eyes wide. I heard it again, soft footsteps, deliberate, slow, moving closer, not from the halls, not outside the office. Behind me, I whipped around. Nothing, just a room. Monitors, desk, chair, flashlight. My radio hummed quietly. I swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed to leave, to run, to escape. But the door was gone. Or at least it wasn't where it should have been. The office stretched further than it had a moment ago. Corners I didn't recognize, walls rearranged subtly. I tried to call out. Hello? My voice sounded distant, swallowed by the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft, mechanical whisper of the building settling. No answer. I returned to the monitors. Every hallway I checked, every floor, every corner was empty, and yet I felt it, watching, following, counting. The thought hit me, cold and unrelenting. None of those people who had worked this shift before me had left willingly. They hadn't quit. Not officially. Not really. And now I understood why. I wasn't meant to leave either. I spent the rest of the night pacing, flashlight cutting through the darkness, checking doors, peering down hallways, listening to the soft hum of machinery. Every sound seemed amplified. Every shadow seemed alive. My mind raced, trying to rationalize. But I couldn't. By dawn, I stumbled out to the parking lot, shaking, exhausted. The hiring manager was there, leaning against the wall, smiling. That same thick smile. "Long night?" he asked casually. I nodded numbly. "Yeah, quiet, too quiet." He chuckled. "That's the night shift for you. Pays good, though. Isn't that what matters?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. I started the truck, hands trembling on the wheel. The factory loomed behind me, silent, patient, and aware. I never went back. I requested a transfer, a day job, anything. The pay didn't matter. I understood now that the incentive wasn't just money. It was a lure, the hook, a way to draw me in, to let me see the truth before it was too late. Nobody had ever left this factory, not by choice, and I wasn't sure I ever would. I had been hired for what they called a simple night shift. Just keep the lights on. Make sure the place is secure, the manager said, glancing at me over the desk. The morgue was in a rural stretch of road, the kind where the darkness swallows everything beyond the headlights of a single car. No neighbors, no passing traffic, just the low hum of the refrigeration units and the occasional creak of the building settling into itself. I parked my truck in the lot, the gravel crunching under the tires. The building loomed ahead, gray and boxy, a cold monument to quiet death. The manager handed me a set of keys and a flashlight. You won't see much tonight. Doors locked, cameras working. Just check the freezers and the halls. And don't worry about anything else. I nodded, feeling the weight of the flashlight like an anchor in my hand. The door groaned as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was chillier than outside, carrying a metallic tang that clung to my nose and throat. The smell of disinfectant mixed with cold metal, and the faint odor of old embalming fluids. I told myself I could handle it. I had handled plenty of lonely, cold jobs before. The main hall was empty. Stainless steel tables gleamed under fluorescent lights. The refrigerators hummed quietly along the walls. Doors closed tight. Everything looked in order. I made a quick circuit, checking each freezer, running my hand along the cold handles, making sure the locks held. Nothing unusual. I made my way to the hallways. Doors closed. The lights flickered faintly above me, casting long, thin shadows along the floor. I passed the office, the break room, the storage closets. All empty. All silent except for my footsteps and the occasional low hum of the lights. I set my flashlight on the desk in the main office and poured myself a cup of coffee. Steam curled in the cold air, warm against my fingers. I tried to shake the sense of unease creeping up my spine, telling myself it was just the isolation, the quiet, the night. Hours passed slowly. I patrolled the hallways again. Everything seemed to be in its place. The hum of the refrigeration units was steady, consistent. The fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, but that was normal for a building this old. I told myself I was being cautious, thorough. That was part of the job. Around 2 a.m., I noticed something odd. One of the freezer doors near the back wasn't fully closed. I froze. My flashlight beam caught the handle. I stepped closer. The door didn't move as I nudged it. Cold air leaked from the gap, but the latch was still locked. Nothing had been touching it. Nothing should have opened it. I backed away slowly, my pulse quickening. I told myself it was a draft, the building shifting. I checked the other doors. Secure. Nothing unusual. But that one door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had passed through it. I patrolled again, flashlights sweeping across the room, my footsteps echoing too loudly in the still air. The hum of the freezer seemed louder now, more insistent, as if they were breathing alive. I told myself it was a fatigue, the isolation, the coffee, too much of everything. By 3 a.m., I was starting to feel it, eyes on me, not from the shadows, not from the doors, but from the emptiness itself. The room felt aware, every corner watching, every hum and drip amplified in my mind. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I had always felt uneasy on long nights alone. But this was different. There was a weight pressing down in the back of my skull, cold, insistent. I went back to the main hall. The tables gleamed cold and sterile. The freezers hummed. I ran my hand along one, feeling the metal vibrate faintly, almost like a heartbeat. I stepped back. My flashlight beam caught a reflection on the polished floor. For a moment, I thought I saw someone standing at the far end of the hall. A shadow, still, watching. I blinked. Nothing. I told myself I was seeing things. Tired eyes, too much coffee, too much quiet. But the feeling didn't leave. I felt a presence behind me, just out of sight, moving with me as I walked the halls. The rest of the night crawled. Every sound, metallic clicks, the faint hum of lights, the low vibration of the refrigeration units, felt amplified, deliberate. I kept my flashlight close, moving slowly, checking doors, checking freezers, checking the hallways I had walked a dozen times already. By 5 a.m., I was exhausted. My hands shook, my eyes stung, but I had made my rounds. Nothing moved. Nothing spoke. The morgue was empty again. Silent. The building still, except for the hum of the freezers and the creak of settling metal. I stepped outside into the pre-dawn chill. The gravel crunched beneath my boots. The road beyond was empty, fading into darkness. I looked back at the building. The lights glowed faintly through the windows, the hum of the freezers inside almost audible in the cold air. I realized then that I had not been alone. Not really. Not the way I thought I was. The building had been aware, watching, waiting, its presence subtle, patient, and impossible to ignore. I made my way to the truck, hands trembling, flashlight still clutched tightly. I started the engine, the hum of it oddly comforting against the unnatural quiet I was leaving behind. Even now, thinking back, I can still feel it. The weight in the air, the hum beneath the floor, the awareness in the walls. I know it's still there, waiting for the next custodian, the next night shift, just keeping the lights on, watching, always watching. I had been walking the halls for hours, flashlight cutting swaths through the darkness, the hum of the refrigeration units my only company. The morgue was colder than usual that night, and I could feel it in my fingers, my ears, my toes press against thick socks and my boots. I told myself it was just the isolation, the long hours, the chill creeping into the old walls. I made my usual rounds, checking the refrigeration units, doors, and storage rooms, making sure everything was secure. Everything seemed in order. The tables gleamed faintly under fluorescent lights, cold and empty, as they always did. And the bodies, well, the bodies were quiet, lying in rows on the slabs, tags neatly pinned, waiting. It was the tags that first caught my attention that night. I was checking the freezers in the back, the ones near the loading dock. I had a routine, as I always did, moving methodically from one unit to the next. The air was thick, almost like it had weight, and the hum of the freezers felt louder than usual. My flashlight illuminated the rows of bodies, each with its toe tag secured. I leaned in to inspect one that had been recently stored. I froze. The date on the tag was tomorrow. I blinked. Maybe I misread it. My eyes were tired. The numbers on the small white tag swam slightly. I shook my head, focusing. No, it was right there. The date, tomorrow. Not today. Not when the body had arrived. Tomorrow. I lifted my flashlight higher and checked the next row. The same thing. Each tag showed a date in the future. Some hours ahead, others even days ahead. My chest tightened. I felt a wave of nausea. My hands shook as I picked up one of the tags, looking closer. No printing errors. No smudges. The ink was crisp, clean, and deliberate. I stepped back. This isn't real, I whispered to myself. It can't be real. I checked the logs in the office. Dates match reality. Body intake matched yesterday, the day before. Nothing unusual on paper, but on the tags, future times. My pulse was pounding now, the hum of the refrigeration units echoing in my skull like a warning. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the tags had been replaced by mistake. Maybe someone was playing a joke. But the morgue was empty. No other night staff. No one had been here for hours. The building was mine for the night. I was alone. I moved down the row, flashlight trembling slightly. Each tag, each body, future time staring back at me. My stomach churned. I wanted to turn away, leave, call someone, but my legs felt heavy, rooted to the floor. Something about the numbers made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't ignore. I remembered the stories I'd heard from the day's shift. Strange things in the morgue. Whispers of tags changing, of cold drafts when no doors were open, of machines humming without power. I dismissed them, told myself people exaggerate. Night shift paranoia. But now, I understood. I picked up a tag, inspecting it as closely as I could. The date was hours ahead of now, exact, precise. I held it and felt the cold creep into my fingers, deeper than it should have. My breath fogged in the air as a hum seemed to rise in pitch, almost like a pulse. I backed away, flashlight beam swinging over slabs. A shadow moved in the corner of my vision. I spun. Nothing. Just the frozen slabs, the hum, the faint flicker of the fluorescent lights. My heart hammered. I noticed where the tags had changed again. I had only been looking away for a moment, long enough to steady my breathing. When I looked back, the date had moved further into the future. Not just hours, now days. I dropped the tag, stepping back. My mind raced. What kind of prank is this? No one else is here. The building is locked. And yet, the tags were alive in a way I couldn't explain. I wandered the halls, checking each freezer, each row, each body. The dates kept updating themselves. Some for a few hours, some forward several days. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, precise, methodical. Like the morgue itself was aware of the passage of time in a way I could not comprehend. I tried to call the office. My radio squealed with static. Nothing else. The quiet was absolute except for the low hum. I returned to the main hall. Tried to tell myself I was imagining things. Maybe exhaustion, maybe isolation, maybe a dream carried into wakefulness. But the tags, my hands shook as I looked at them again. They moved, they counted down, and they weren't mine to control. Hours passed like minutes. I kept checking, unable to look away. Some of the dates had jumped hours while I paced the halls. Others had moved farther, deeper into the future than I could fathom. I realized then that the morgue was keeping time differently than the world outside. I wasn't sure if it was ahead or behind, only that it was not mine to understand. The hum of the refrigeration units shifted subtly, vibrating through the floor. The lights flickered. Shadows moved where there shouldn't have been shadows. Every step I took was echoed by the building itself, a rhythm that seemed synchronized with the changing tags. I leaned against a freezer, shaking. Sweat ran down my back despite the cold. The tags, they weren't just marking death. They were marking something else. I could feel it in my bones, in the low vibration under my feet. A countdown, a warning, a memory of what had been and what would be. I tried to leave. I ran to the main entrance. Keys in hand, I unlocked the door. The gravel outside was just beyond my reach. But when I opened it, the wind carried a cold deeper than winter, smelling faintly metallic. I stepped out. My boots crunched on the gravel. I looked back. The windows glowed faintly. The hum of the building carried out to me, almost like laughter. I knew I had only left temporarily. The tags, the dates, the morgue, they would be waiting, watching, counting, recording. Time was not mine in that building. I had only borrowed it. I drove away slowly, eyes on the road, trying to convince myself it was just fatigue, just isolation, just a trick of fluorescent light and imagination. But deep down, I knew better. When I looked at my own hands, I realized the cold had followed me. I felt it creeping into my bones, whispering, reminding me that time in that morgue didn't belong to me. The tags would keep moving. Forward, always forward. And I could never truly leave. I never thought I would feel fear the moment I reached for a drawer. Not in a morgue. Not in a building designed for death, where fear should be expected and anticipated, almost natural. But that night was different. I had made my rounds as usual. Fluorescent lights flickered softly, casting long shadows over the stainless steel tables. Refrigeration units hummed their cold, low rhythm, the sound familiar, almost comforting. I told myself it was just another night, another shift to pass until sunrise. I checked the freezers, the storage rooms, even the small office tucked in the corner. Nothing unusual, everything in its place. It was the last drawer I hadn't checked, a small, narrow unit, half hidden in a hallway that branched off from the main room. The hallway was darker, colder, the kind of chill that crawled up your legs, twisting around your bones. I shined my flashlight down the corridor, the beam catching dust in the air, particles floating like tiny specters. I opened the drawer slowly, like I had been trained to do with every body. The latch was cold in my hand. The metal groaned as I lifted the handle, the sound echoing down the empty hall. I expected a familiar sight, another body, another tag, routine, and then I saw it. The body was there, yes, but the tag pinned neatly to its toe had my name. At first, I thought it was a joke, a misplaced tag. My pulse jumped, and I stumbled back a step. My flashlight wavered in my hand, casting long shadows along the walls. My own name, printed in crisp black letters on a small white tag. No date, no time, just my name. I blinked. I leaned closer, hesitant. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the flashlight. The letters were unmistakable. My exact name, spelled correctly. My middle initial included, the way my parents had always insisted I use it on official forms. I backed away, heart hammering. This had to be a mistake. I had never seen this drawer before. I didn't remember storing anything here. I didn't remember anyone putting anything here. And yet, it was real. My name stared at me, unblinking, unavoidable. I tried to tell myself it was a prank. Someone on the day's shift, maybe, trying to scare me. But the building was locked. The night shift was mine alone. The keys were in my pocket. No one else had been here. The hum of the refrigeration units seemed to grow louder. My own heartbeat thudded in my ears, echoing against the walls. I felt the cold pressing in, more intense than usual. The drawer didn't just hold a body. It held a possibility I couldn't yet comprehend. I grabbed the drawer's handle with both hands, shaking, and pulled it open slightly. The body inside was covered with a thin sheet, pale under the weak light. I could just make out the shape, the contours of a form lying perfectly still. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. I shouldn't have looked. I pulled the sheet back a little, enough to see a hand, pale, lifeless, and I thought for a split second that I could see faint traces of something moving, like the skin was twitching, or maybe my mind was tricking me. But no, it was just a reflection of the light. The room seemed to warp slightly, the edges of my vision bending in a way that made the walls feel closer. I stepped back, gasping. The drawer trembled slightly, as if it had weight beyond the body inside. My flashlight flickered, casting the tag in a stark beam. My name pinned to death. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But my legs felt rooted, my body heavy, as if the weight of that drawer was pressing to the floor and into me. I stared at the tag. My name. I tried to think of every explanation. A typo? A joke? A hallucination? None of them fit. None of them made sense. I reached out, trembling, to touch the tag. My fingers hovered above it, hesitant, almost paralyzed by dread. When I did brush the surface, cold metal pin pressing into my skin, I felt a shiver ripple through me. Not just a cold, but a presence, a memory, maybe something from before I knew what fear really was. Something waiting for me. I stumbled back again, bumping the flashlight against the wall. The beam wavered, flickering across the hall, catching the edges of shadows that weren't my own. The hum of the refrigeration units pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to leave, and yet I couldn't. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady myself. I forced my mind to reason. Maybe it was a filing error. Maybe the tag was old, left behind from some time ago. Some previous custodian who had used my name by coincidence. But no, the handwriting matched the official style. Crisp and intentional. This wasn't a coincidence. I could feel it then. Something in the building. Watching. Patient. Waiting. Not in the halls. Not in the shadows. But in the walls themselves. In the air. In the hum. A presence that had always been here. Waiting for the right moment. The right person. I turned my eyes back to the drawer. The tag seemed to shimmer slightly, as though the letters themselves were alive, bending subtly under my gaze. My chest tightened. The air felt thicker. My flashlight's beam wavered. I wanted to shut it, to close the drawer and forget I had ever seen it. But my hands moved against my will. My fingers gripped the edge of the metal again. The body didn't move. The sheet lay still. But the tag, my name, felt alive, like it was breathing, like it was counting down. I stepped back fully, finally shaking. I felt my legs quiver. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. I needed to leave, needed to escape. But I knew, deep down, that leaving wasn't enough. Not anymore. I backed out the hallway slowly, keeping the drawer in sight. Every step felt heavier than the last. I could hear it. The low hum of the building, subtle but insistent, resonating to the floor and walls. Not just the refrigeration units, but the building itself. Alive, watching, waiting. I reached the main hall. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead. I grabbed my radio, tried to call someone. Anything. Nothing but static. The hum continued, louder, closer, like it had followed me. I realized in what I had feared all along. The drawer wasn't just a mistake. It was a warning. My name there meant something. Not just an identity, but a claim, a record, something deeper than paper, beyond human understanding. I ran my hands over my face, trying to shake the panic, trying to ground myself. I told myself I was tired, overworked, imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining it. I knew that drawer with that tag with my name had been waiting for me. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I patrolled, tried to distract myself, avoided the drawer, tried to ignore the presence that seemed to follow, pulse, and echo my every step. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I blinked, I saw in the corner of my mind, my name, pinned, waiting, inevitable. By dawn, I left the building. My truck's engine roared in the cold morning air, a brief comfort against a lingering dread. I looked back once. The morgue was silent, empty, lifeless, but I knew better. The drawer, the body, the tag, my name, it wasn't gone. Not really. And I knew it would be there when I returned. Waiting, watching, claiming. I had no choice. I had become part of it. And the thought that chilled me most, the drawer had been there before I even knew it existed. And somehow it had known my name. I parked my truck on the cracked asphalt of the old church lot, the tires crunching over scattered bits of gravel and ash. The building loomed ahead, blackened and scarred in the fire that had gutted it months ago. The windows were broken, edges jagged and blackened, and the steeple had partially collapsed, leaving the bell dangling like a broken tooth. The smell of smoke still clung to the air, faint but stubborn, curling into my nostrils like a warning. I had taken the job because it was simple, just keep watch overnight. No one would be there, no services, no crowds, no Sunday morning chaos. Just me in the ruins, monitoring for trespassers, vandals, or worse. The manager handed me a set of keys and a flashlight and said, "It's just a formality. Sit in the office. Take your rounds. Call if anything seems off. Nobody comes here at night." I nodded. The manager didn't need to know that I had a feeling something was off from the moment I drove in. Something about the stillness of the building, the way the shadows stretched too long over the blackened walls, made my stomach tighten. I made my first round with the flashlight, stepping carefully over broken pews, ash, and chunks of charred wood. The smell of smoke mixed with decay, lingering in the corners and crevices. I moved slowly, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the jagged lines of ruined doors, scorched floors, and empty altars. Every sound, my boots on the wood, the faint whistle of the wind through broken windows, echoed too sharply in the hollow space. I reached the back hall, where the offices had been mostly spared by the fire. Paper scattered across the floor, yellowed and brittle, swirled slightly in the draft. My flashlight caught the remnant of a bulletin board, still pinned with charred notices, some half legible. I bent to inspect them, but nothing mattered. The church was empty, silent, dead. I made my way to the main sanctuary. The pews were blackened, some reduced to skeletons of wood. The altar was scorched, the cloths burned to nothing. I ran my hand along the remnants, feeling the rough charred edges, the hollow hollows where the fire had eaten the soft wood. My stomach churned, but I told myself I was fine. I was just documenting, just checking the perimeter, just keeping the lights on. But the shadows weren't behaving as they should. In the corners, they seemed to twist slightly, stretching longer than my flashlight could account for, bending along the charred walls like dark water pooling in the corners. I shook my head and told myself it was the angle of the beam the fatigue from driving in. I moved toward the altar again. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and I noticed black streaks across the wood, smoke stains, almost forming shapes that my mind insisted were faces. I swallowed hard and shook my head. I had seen nothing. Nothing at all. Just charred walls, burned wood, the emptiness of a building destroyed by fire. I made a circuit around the sanctuary, flashlights sweeping over broken windows and scorched pews. The wind whistled through one of the broken windows, carrying dust and ash into the room. It stirred the smell of smoke and decay, making my eyes water. I coughed, tried to ignore the feeling crawling along my spine. Then I heard it, soft, faint, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. I froze, flashlight trembling in my hand. The sound wasn't in the hallway, not outside, not near the office. It seemed to come from the altar itself. My pulse quickened. I told myself it was nothing. A loose board, maybe a gust of wind. I took a slow step forward. The whisper came again, soft, unintelligible. Words that seemed almost human, but not quite. My stomach turned cold. I wanted to run, to leave, but my legs were heavy, reluctant to move. I stepped closer, flashlight sweeping across the altar. There was nothing, only charred wood and the faint ash dusting everything like a gray blanket. My breath came shallow. My pulse hammered in my ears. I tried to rationalize it, but the hairs on my neck stood on end. I decided to check the back hall again, to keep my rounds routine. Maybe the wind was playing tricks. Maybe the building was settling. Anything logical, anything human. As I walked, the shadows seemed to shift around me, stretching along walls, pooling in corners. The whispers didn't continue, but a low vibration traveled to the floorboards, faint, almost imperceptible, like the building itself was exhaling. I froze. The vibration rose slightly as I stepped forward, keeping pace with my heartbeat. I reached the back office. Broken files and charred papers littered the floor. I shined the flashlight across them, trying to ground myself. Everything was empty, still as it should be, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was observing me, patient, waiting just beyond the beam of my light. I moved slowly back toward the sanctuary. The night dragged, minutes stretching into hours. Every floorboard creaked, every hum of the wind, every flicker of shadow felt magnified, deliberate. I couldn't tell if the sound was real or my own heartbeat playing tricks. Around 3 a.m., I noticed movement, just a flicker near the altar. My flashlight caught it, a shadow detaching from the charred wall. I blinked. It disappeared. I told myself it was the ash in the air, the angle of the beam, exhaustion, but the chill in my spine told me otherwise. I made one last round of the hallways before dawn. The building was empty. The broken pews, the charred walls, the silent sanctuary, all still, all lifeless. But the feeling of being watched hadn't left. It had followed me, patient, cold, waiting. When the first light of dawn crept through the broken windows, I stepped outside. Gravel crunched under my boots. The air smelled fresher, carried on the wind, but the smoke lingered faintly, stubborn. I looked back at the building. The blackened windows, the dangling bell, the charred walls. It seemed harmless now, quiet in the morning light, but I knew better. I had felt the presence in the walls, the whispers in the shadows, the building alive in a way no structure should be. I drove away slowly, watching the burned steeple disappear in my rearview mirror. I knew I would return another night, another shift, but I also knew something else. The church hadn't been destroyed by fire alone. It was waiting, watching, patient, and no matter how far I drove, no matter how far I thought I'd left it behind, I could feel the weight of that waiting presence at the edges of my mind. The lights may have been out, services may have ended, but the church had never stopped keeping watch. I didn't notice it at first. The building was quiet, blackened from the fire, and every step I took on the cracked floorboards echoed too loudly. I had made my rounds a dozen times, checking the main hall, the back offices, the collapsed pews. Everything seemed in place. Ash, charred wood, broken glass, wind drifting to broken windows, It all felt natural, expected, normal. Then I reached the sanctuary, the confessional. It sat in the corner. Its dark would scorch along the edges, the panels blackened but still intact. The smell of smoke clung to it, faint but stubborn, and the door, a small, narrow rectangle with a slothful priest, was closed. At least, I thought it was closed. I leaned over to inspect it. My flashlight beam swept across the surface, highlighting the blackened wood and the remnants of soot. Then I noticed it. The door was ajar and narrow cracked, a shadow of space where there should have been wood. I froze. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't been near it on this round. The confessional door had been closed when I passed it 20 minutes ago. My pulse picked up. I told myself it must have been the wind, the draft that moved through the broken windows, drifting across the sanctuary. I rationalized. It had to be the wind. I stepped closer, flashlight sweeping over the gap. The door moved slightly, swaying almost imperceptibly, like it was breathing. The air felt heavier here, thick with the smell of ash and something else, something faintly metallic, almost coppery, like blood. My stomach churned. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was the angle of the light. Maybe the shadows were playing tricks. Maybe I was tired. But the hair on my arms and neck stood on end, a chill crawling under my skin. I reached out to push the door closed. My fingers brushed the edge of the wood. It swung wider on its own, just enough to reveal the small interior. Darkness pooled inside the confessional, deeper than the shadows in the sanctuary. I swallowed hard. I wanted to leave. I wanted to ignore it. I told myself there was nothing inside, nothing human, nothing that could hurt me. But something inside me knew it wasn't just a door. It wasn't just a broken piece of charred wood in a ruined church. I leaned in closer. My flashlight beam swept inside the small booth. Nothing, just a narrow bench, blackened by smoke, and the walls scarred and soot-streaked. But I could feel it. Something waiting, watching, a presence that didn't belong in the world outside. Patient, silent, observing. I stepped back. The door creaked again, swinging slightly, opening wider this time. My pulse jumped. I wanted to run, but my legs were heavy, rooted. The sanctuary felt larger than it should have. The shadows stretching along the walls, pulling into corners that should have been empty. I told myself it was nothing. Tired eyes, isolation, a building settling into itself. But the unease settled deeper, pressing into my chest, coiling around my ribs. I spent the next hour patrolling the sanctuary, my flashlight cutting lines through the darkness. Every time I passed a confessional, the door was open, then closed, then slightly open again. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't approached it. And yet it moved, as if it had a will of its own. I remembered stories I'd heard about old churches, how buildings held memories, how space is soaked in what had happened inside them. But this wasn't a memory. It wasn't past. It was now, watching, present, persistent. I moved closer again, trying to reason, to force logic into the place where dread had taken root. I reached out, fingertips brushing the edge. Cold. The wood was colder than it should have been. Frosted almost, like it had absorbed the chill of the night itself. I pushed gently. The door swung wider. Inside, the booth felt darker than it should have, the shadows pulling away that made my flashlight tremble. I saw nothing, but I felt eyes on me. Not human eyes. Patient, unblinking, indifferent. I shivered. I stepped back. My flashlight flickered. The hum of the wind through broken windows sounded almost like whispers. Not words, not sentences, but low tones, vibrations that echoed to the floor and walls, through my bones. I tried to distract myself, walking the length of the sanctuary, checking the broken pews, the charred altar, the ruined hymn books. I told myself I was being careful, thorough, doing the job I had been hired for. But every step I took, every glance I stole toward the confessional, I could feel it. That space was not empty. That door was not just wood. It moved, watched, waited. Hours passed. The night dragged on, minutes stretching into an eternity. Every time I passed a confessional, the door was ajar, swinging slightly, welcoming, patient. I wanted to ignore it, to leave, to pretend it wasn't moving, but I couldn't. Something inside me refused to let me. At one point, I swore I saw a shadow inside the booth. Just a movement, flickering at the edge of my vision. I spun, flashlight shaking, and nothing was there. The shadows remained, pooling and twisting, but empty. My chest tightened. My hands shook. I tried to rationalize again. Drafts, old hinges, fatigue. Anything logical. But I knew better. I felt in the air, in the hum of the building, in the way the darkness seemed to press closer each time I passed. By 4 a.m., I had stopped patrolling entirely. I stood in the center of the sanctuary, flashlight held high, staring at the confessional. The door swung slightly again, just enough to remind me it wasn't mine, that it had a will I could not comprehend. I realized then that I had been watched the entire night, not by a person, not by something I could see, but by the building itself, by the shadows, by the small booth that should have been empty. The first light of dawn began to filter through the broken windows, faint and gray. The door was closed now, still inert. The sanctuary looked harmless again, just charred wood, broken pews, and a ruined altar. But I knew it was only waiting, patient, watching, waiting for the night to return. I left the building slowly, boots crunching on gravel, flashlight swinging lightly in my hand. I looked back once. The confessional door was closed, innocuous, silent. But I could feel it in my chest, in the hollow echo of the sanctuary, in the lingering cold. It would open again. It would wait. And I knew I would return. Another night. Another shift. Another hour in the presence of a door that shouldn't move. And when I did, it would be ready. Watching. Waiting. Silent. Always waiting. I had just finished my rounds, checking the main hall and the broken pews again, trying to convince myself that the church was just a building, dead and silent, nothing more than charred wood and ash. My flashlight's beam traced over the altar, the scorched edges of hymnals, the collapsed pews. Everything seemed in place, as if the night hadn't tried to move or breathe while I wasn't looking. I was about to turn toward the back hall when it happened. A bell rang, just once, a single, hollow clang that echoed through the empty sanctuary, bouncing off the walls, rattling the broken windows. Sharp, metallic, impossible to ignore. The sound didn't vibrate like a normal bell. It resonated differently, almost inside my chest, deep in my bones, making my pulse skip. I froze, flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. The bell had not been attached to anything intact. The tower was half collapsed. The rope dangling from what remained swayed faintly. But there was no one there to pull it. No wind that could reach so high. And yet, the sound had come clear and deliberate. My mind raced. Old bells sometimes ring on their own, right? Metal contracts. Temperatures shift. But I'd worked enough nights here to know. I'd walked through broken windows when the wind was worse. Through the drafts and the hollow floors. That was no ordinary sound. I gripped my flashlight tighter and stepped toward the altar. My boots scraped against the charred wood. My breath came short, uneven, and I felt the weight of the empty building pressing down around me. Shadows clung to the corners, stretched unnaturally along the walls. And through it all, silence again, save for the echoing pulse of that one bell strike. I tried to convince myself it meant nothing. Just a coincidence. Just an echo. My mind playing tricks on me. But it wasn't just a sound. It felt like acknowledgement, like the building or something inside it had noticed me, taken note, marked me. I moved cautiously down the center aisle, flashlight swinging, checking each pew, each corner, scanning for movement. Nothing. The air smelled faintly of smoke, ash, and something older, something sharp, almost metallic. My pulse raced. Then I heard it again. Not the bell this time, but a faint vibration like a heartbeat, almost imperceptible at first. I stopped walking, straining to hear. The sound grew steadily, rhythmic, deep, vibrating through floorboards. It was coming from the tower, I realized, or at least somewhere above me, though the stairs were blocked, collapsed in the fire. I forced myself to keep moving. I had to investigate, to understand what was happening. I couldn't let my mind spiral. couldn't let the darkness and the building's presence overtake me completely. I approached the base of the collapsed tower. Chunks of wood, stone, and soot littered the floor. My flashlight swept over the debris, catching glimpses of jagged metal and blackened beams. I couldn't see any way up, and yet the bell had rung. I felt the hairs on my arms stand on end. The building wasn't just empty. It was aware, alive, in a way I couldn't explain. And it was responding to me, not in a playful way, not in a welcoming way, just acknowledging. I stepped back from the tower and turned toward the sanctuary again. The shadows along the walls seemed thicker now, darker. They moved slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them, pooling in corners, reaching toward the altar, toward the pews. I felt a pull in my chest, like the echo of the bell was reaching inside me, tugging at something I didn't want to admit I had. The time struck me suddenly. I checked my phone. 3:17 a.m. The exact moment the bell had sounded. My pulse thudded against my ribs. I couldn't explain it. Nothing in the building matched the time, and yet it had rung at the exact second. I tried to distract myself. I walked the length of the sanctuary again, checking each broken pew, each scorched wall, each corner where shadows pooled thick. My flashlight trembled in my hand, casting long, wavering lines. Every time I passed the altar, I felt it, eyes, or something like them, watching, patient, judging, waiting. Then I heard a faint scraping sound behind me. I spun, flashlight swinging, beam catching the broken windows, the charred pews, the altar. Nothing. The shadows were still, inert, but the scraping persisted, faint and deliberate, like claws or nails moving across wood, moving closer with each heartbeat. I tried to rationalize again. Maybe a board shifted. Maybe debris had fallen. But the sound was too precise, too deliberate. It wasn't random. It had intent. I moved back toward the altar, trying to stay grounded, trying to focus on the floor beneath my feet. My flashlight trembled in my hand, catching glimpses of the charred sanctuary, the ruined pews, the altar with its scorched cloth. And then I saw it, not fully, not completely, but a shadow darker than surrounding darkness, flickered near the altar, then vanished. I froze, heart hammering. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. The presence of the building, of the shadows, of that bell, it pressed down on me. Heavy, inescapable. I told myself to leave, to get out, but my legs refused. My mind refused. Part of me needed to see it, to understand it, even as every instinct screamed to run. I stood there, flashlight trembling, waiting. Nothing moved for a long moment. Then another faint vibration. The bell's echo, or memory of it, reverberated through the floor, through the walls, through me. 3:17 a.m. again. The exact same resonance. My pulse thudded, synced with the echo. The building had acknowledged me, marked me. I didn't know for what, and I didn't want to, but I felt it then, deep in my chest, in the base of my spine. Something had noticed me. Something was aware of my presence. Watching, waiting. I took a step back, stumbled, and my flashlight beam landed on the confessional in the corner. The door was slightly ajar again, as if it had been moved while I wasn't looking. My stomach dropped. The movement of that small door, the echo of the bell, the shadows twisting along the walls, it all pressed down on me, unrelenting. The night seemed endless after that. Every floorboard creak, every hum of the wind, every flicker of shadow carried the memory of that single bell. I walked the sanctuary again, slowly, deliberately, trying to keep my mind from unraveling. The door of the confessional swung slightly with each step, the shadows pooling thicker in the corners. I couldn't leave it behind. I couldn't ignore it. By dawn, the light creeping through the broken windows made everything seem normal again. The bell hadn't rung again. The shadows had thinned, retreated into corners. The confessional door was still. The church looked harmless, quiet, inert. But I knew better. I knew the bell had acknowledged me. The building had noticed me. And when night returned, when the clock struck again, I would hear it. I would feel it. And I would know the church was waiting. Patient, watchful, silent. No one else could hear it. No one else would notice. But I had. And that made me different. marked, and it left a weight in my chest I could not shake, a cold certainty that the church did not forgive, did not forget, and would always be listening. The bell had rung at 3:17, and I would never forget it. I arrived at the rail yard just as the first edge of night was settling over the tracks. The place was quiet, almost too quiet for a rail yard this size, with hundreds of tracks branching out in every direction, the skeletal outline of freight cars stretching into the darkness. My truck crunched over the gravel as I pulled into the lot, headlights cutting through the low fog that hugged the rails. I'd been hired for overnight security, nothing fancy. Walk the lines, check the cars, make sure no one was trespassing, and report anything unusual. The manager's instructions were simple. Most nights, nothing happens. You'll probably just see a few cars moving, a train or two, but nothing strange. Just keep your eyes open. I had taken the job because I like quiet nights. They let my mind wander, let me think without interruption. But there was something about this place that didn't feel right from the first moment I stepped onto the yard. Maybe it was the smell of rust and oil mixed with wet earth. Maybe it was the way the fog clung to the tracks like a living thing. Or maybe it was the tracks themselves, stretching endlessly into darkness with no end in sight. I started my first round, flashlight in hand, boots crunching on gravel. I walked along the rows of freight cars, checking the seals, noting the numbers of my log. Everything seemed normal. Boxes were stacked neatly, some open, some closed, some locked. I moved slowly, methodically. This was my first night, and I didn't want to make mistakes. About 2 hours into the shift, I reached a section of the yard I hadn't checked yet, one tucked behind a cluster of cranes and loading platforms. My flashlight beam caught the glint of metal and I froze. New cars. Freight cars that hadn't been there when I first arrived. They were clean, sealed, their numbers unfamiliar. I crouched, shining the light over the numbers and seals. The cars were locked tight, no signs of tampering, no footprint around them, nothing to suggest anyone had been here. But they hadn't been here earlier. I would have noticed. I had walked this section just an hour ago. The gravel, the tracks, there was no trace of movement leading these cars in. I felt my pulse quicken. My instincts told me to call in, to radio someone and ask if new shipments had come in, but my radio crackle was static. No one answered. Maybe they were busy or maybe they were asleep. Night was deepening, fog thickening, and I felt the weight of the empty yard pressing in on me. I circled the cars, checking the seals again, flashlight catching the rivets, the steel, the numbers stamped into the metal. Everything was intact. Nothing was out of place. And yet, I had not seen these cars before. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I had just missed them in the shadows. Maybe my mind was playing tricks after the long drive, after the monotony of checking the same tracks over and over. But the unease didn't leave. The yard felt alive in a way I hadn't expected. Silent, yes, but attentive, watching. I decided to keep moving, to finish my round. I walked past the cranes, past the stacks of empty pallets, back toward the main lot. The fog thickened around me, curling along the rails, seeping into the gaps between the cars. My flashlight caught movement in the corner of my eye, just a flicker, but when I turned, there was nothing, just the yard, silent, cold, waiting. I stopped at the edge of the lot, shining the flashlight down a row of cars. Every car was sealed, locked, empty, and then I noticed it. The same type of cars I had just seen, stretching further down the tracks than I had walked. More of them, hundreds of them, it seemed, lined up in perfect rows, their doors closed, their numbers unknown. I took a step back. My boots crunched on gravel. I turned to leave, to radio someone anything, but the radio was dead, just static. I pressed the buttons, shaking, heart racing, and still nothing. I tried to convince myself to check the cars again, to make sure I wasn't imagining it. I walked slowly down the nearest track, flashlight sweeping over the sides. The steel was cold, slick with dew, and the seals were unbroken. Not a single sign of movement, but the weight of their presence. It was oppressive, pressing in from every angle. I stopped midway down the row, catching my reflection in the dark windows of the cars. My own eyes looked back at me, wide, tense, but something behind them, I couldn't place it. Something waiting, something patient. I shook my head, telling myself it was fatigue, that I'd been staring at metal and shadows too long. I walked back to the main lot, keeping my flashlight beam tight. Every few steps, I glanced back down the rows. The fog had shifted. The cars, some of them seemed closer than before. Not moved entirely, not exactly, but closer in a way that felt wrong. I felt like I had missed something, some small movement in the periphery of my vision. I tried calling it again. The static filled the air. Nothing. I was alone, and the yard was too quiet, too patient. I decided to finish my rounds. I walked every row I could reach, checking the seals, counting the cars, making notes in my log. The numbers never matched up. More cars kept appearing at the edges of my flashlight. New rows stretching into the fog I hadn't noticed before. I stopped counting after a while. My mind couldn't keep up. My pulse thrummed in my ears. By the time I returned to the main office, the first hints of dawn were brushing the sky with gray. The fog lifted slightly, revealing the full extent of the yard. It looked normal again. The rows of cars were fewer, the tracks open, no strange new freight waiting in the shadows. Nothing unusual. I sat at my desk, writing in the log, hand shaking, coffee cold in my cup. My mind replayed the night over and over. The empty cars, the sealed doors, the way the fog had moved, the static of the radio. When I stepped outside, the yard looked like any other. Tracks stretching into the distance, scattered freight cars, cranes idle in the morning light. Nothing unusual. And yet, I knew better. I had seen it. I had felt it. Cars had arrived empty. Without drivers. Without anyone to bring them in. Something moved them in the dark. Something patient, silent, aware. And I knew, if I stayed the next night, they would appear again. I drove away slowly, headlights cutting through the thinning fog, glancing back at the yard. The rails stretched like veins into the distance. Somewhere out there, beyond the limits of my vision, the empty freight cars waited, watching, arriving, patient, and I knew the next night I would return, and they would be there again, silent, sealed, and impossibly aware. I started the second night at the yard with the same ritual I developed the night before. Truck parked, flashlight in hand, boots crunching on gravel. The fog was thicker this time, rolling low across the tracks like a living thing. It clung to my jacket, my hair, making the night feel heavier, like the air itself was pressing down on me. I told myself I had to stay calm. The first night had been unsettling, yes, but there were logical explanations. Cars could have been moved by late trains. Fog could play tricks on the eye. I repeated it over and over as I walked the length of the yard, checking each car, noting the seals, the numbers, everything methodically. My hand hovered over my radio constantly, waiting for static or voice, anything. But nothing. Silence. It was hours before I even noticed the first anomaly. I had just finished my inventory of the main rows, jotting down numbers and checking seals for the third time to reassure myself I wasn't imagining things. That's when I heard it. A knock. Soft. Deliberate. Metallic against metal. I froze, flashlight beam shaking slightly. It came again, from one of the freight cars I had already inspected. I told myself it had to be a loose door, shifting the wind, a vibration echoing from the rails. But the sound was too distinct, too controlled. A deliberate rap, repeated. Someone or something was inside. I swallowed hard, gripping my flashlight like a lifeline. My boots felt heavy on the gravel as I moved toward the car. Each step made the air feel colder, thicker, like I was wading through water instead of walking across gravel. I shined the beam into the small gap beneath the door. Nothing. Empty, silent, metallic shadows. I crouched, ears straining for the next knock. Another rap right after I leaned closer. No rhythm I could identify, just deliberate, almost impatient. Hello, I called softly. My voice sounded too loud, echoing back at me from the nearest rails. No answer, only the sound of my heartbeat and the faint hum of distant electrical lines. I circled the car, inspecting it from every angle. No footprints, no signs of tampering. The ground was untouched. And yet, every few seconds, Another rap came from inside, from within the metal belly of the car. I stepped back, leaning against the next car for support. I tried to reason it out. Rats maybe? The wind? Something in the frame vibrating? But the sound was deliberate. Every knock had intent, and it always waited for me to finish looking away before striking again. It demanded attention. I felt a cold sweat form at the base of my neck. My flashlight's beam wavered, flickering across the metal surfaces. The yard around me seemed impossibly vast in the darkness, stretching further than it should. Shadows pulled unnaturally under the cars, dark tongues licking the edges of the gravel. I took a deep breath and decided I had to finish the inventory. I couldn't let myself get lost in fear. Methodically, I started down the next row, jotting numbers, checking seals, each knock echoing behind me like a heartbeat I couldn't escape. It wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. It was precise, patient. By the time I returned to the first car, the one that had started this, it was late, fog pressing against my face, visibility almost gone. The knocking had stopped. Silence. The contrast was almost worse than the sound itself. My mind screamed to leave, to get back to the truck, back to the safety of the main lot. But I couldn't. Something held me, some irrational need to understand, to see what was inside that car. I approached slowly, each footstep a careful negotiation with the gravel, the frost clinging to the rails beneath. My flashlight illuminated the lock and the seams of the door. Everything was sealed, untouched. The metal was cold, unnervingly so, and I could feel the chill creeping through my gloves, through my sleeves, up my arms. Then the sound came again, not from above, not from the rails, but inside. A single rap, soft, deliberate, insistent. I froze mid-step, gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles hurt. It came again, then another, in a sequence I couldn't predict, but that felt like it had meaning. A rhythm, a language of knocks. I realized with a sinking feeling that it was waiting for something, waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to acknowledge it. I crouched, shining the light beneath the door again. Nothing. No shadow, no sign of movement. Just the empty darkness inside the car, cold metal walls. I felt the pressure building in the air, the fog outside swirling in ways that didn't make sense. The yard had grown too silent, too oppressive. Every sound of the night, the faint hum of electricity, the rustle of distant leaves, was swallowed in the tension pressing down on me. I wanted to leave. I wanted to get back to the truck and radio it in, tell someone, anything, but a part of me couldn't move. Something demanded I stay, demanded I see it through. My legs felt like lead, my chest tight, and then I understood. The knocks weren't random. They weren't just there to scare me. They were asking to be counted, to be acknowledged. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't alone. Something inside those cars, something patient and aware, wanted recognition. I stepped closer, flashlight trembling. The air grew colder still, pressing it on my shoulders, on my chest, on the back of my neck. Another knock, louder this time, as if confirming my realization. I could feel it pulsing through the metal walls, through the ground beneath my boots. Through me. I hesitated, hand hovering over the lock. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to know what was inside. But ignoring it felt worse. There was weight in the darkness, expectation. The cars demanded acknowledgement. They demanded counting. I stepped back, letting the flashlight beam fall over the row of cars, over gravel, over the endless tracks. I spoke softly, voice trembling. I see you. I see all of you. The knocking stopped. Silence settled, thick and heavy, pressing in on me from all sides. My breath came in ragged gasps. The fog swirled, parting slightly as if to let me breathe. The yard stretched endlessly into the dark, empty, but the presence lingered, patient, waiting. I finished the inventory, shaking, my pen barely able to hold on to the notebook. Each seal I checked felt heavier, each car more alive than the moment before. I left the yard, the first hints of dawn bleeding over the horizon. Fog thinning, but the memory of the night pressing down. The trucks, the rails, the cars, they would be back. Empty, sealed, waiting. And next time, they would ask again. Ask to be counted. and I knew I would hear it, and I knew I would answer. Because once something asks to be counted, silence is no longer an option.